Okay, everyone, we are going to begin today's meeting. My name is Adriana Hernandez, and I work for the Office of Community Air Protection here at CARB, also referred to as OCAP. And before we dive into today's meeting topics, I'm going to give a quick review of our Zoom controls so that we all know how to best participate in today's discussion. So the options may differ depending on if you're a panelist or an attendee. Panelist view is for consultation group members and staff. Attendees view is for everyone in the public, not a panelist. And here we have a few visuals to help describe how everyone can participate today. So the reactions feature is enabled. So during participation or discussion period, to raise your hand, you may have to click reactions and then click raise hand to be added into the queue to speak. For those joining us on the phone today, to raise your hand, please dial #2, and to unmute, dial *6. We encourage consultation group members to use their video so that attendees can see you. And to do so, you simply have to click on the video icon. The chat feature today will be used by staff or panelists only to share links and information with the public. Now we have public comment periods built throughout the meeting, but if panelists and attendees have any questions, you can use our Q&A function available for you to submit your questions at any time. And staff will be monitoring the Q&A to address your question during public comment. So please put your question into the Q&A to make sure that we record your question and make sure your name is displayed correctly on Zoom. And then for consultation group members, that means name and affiliation, please. And if you have any technical challenges, of course, please reach out to Ms. Liliana Nunez, who is our tech staff today. And with that, I'll now pass your attention to our co-chairs. Thank you. Dr. Balmes, you're muted.
Thank you, Adriana. I'm John Balmes. I think you all know me, and I'm co-chairing with Vice Mayor Hurt. And I have the pleasure of starting things off by thanking Jenny Quintana for her service on the consultation group. I don't think she's joined us, but she was one of the original members of the consultation group, and we greatly appreciated her as an academic member, and especially as an academic member with an environmental justice focus to her work. The other change in membership is Gustavo Aguirre Jr., who has represented the San Joaquin Valley through his affiliation with Central California Environmental Justice Network. And we've lost him from CCEJN, but the director of CCEJN, Naomi Martinez, who was one of the writers of the People's Blueprint, is going to replace him. So our loss is also our gain with regard to Naomi. And so with that, I might turn it over to my co-chair for the next.
Thank you. Thank you, Co-Chair Balmes. If I could just really second the thanks, and we really appreciate all of your time and thoughtful ideas on implementing and improving the Community Air Protection Program. So many thanks to Dr. Quintana and Mr. Aguirre for their work. And if we could move on to our meeting objectives and agenda review. And of course, I would also second welcoming everyone here, as well as the public and the consultation group. So for this afternoon, we had an agenda set of meeting on February the 21st. All the consultation group members that were in attendance agreed on the following meeting objectives and agenda. And so just really quickly thanking them for their time and their diligence. We're going to learn more about the CARB Advisory Committee. We will look at the transparency requirements, CARB's civil rights efforts, and the community air protection program updates. That was a mouthful. And what we'll do is we'll integrate public comments throughout those agendized items. And the overview of the CARB Advisory Committee transparency requirements is where we will begin. And I'll now hand it over to Co-Chair Balmes to talk about meeting agreements.
Got to remember to unmute. So thank you, Vice Mayor Hurt. I'm looking for my, so we want to emphasize that we want to have a conversation where everyone feels free to express their thoughts, even if differing viewpoints come up. So I think on screen, we have the specifics. We'd like people to keep their comments short and focused on the agenda topics so that we can move through the busy agenda we have today. And as I've said, all perspectives are welcome. This is a diverse group. It's intentionally a diverse group of stakeholders, from EJ leaders to Air District participants to business leaders. And so I've been pleased. The last few meetings, we've had a very respectful environment. We want to keep that going. I think we're much more productive when we can respect each other's opinions, even when we disagree. So no personal attacks or innuendo. And we urge everybody to be comfortable. It's a long meeting, 3 hours, so take personal breaks as needed. And use video as desired, though, as was already mentioned. We'd appreciate people staying on video as much as possible so like we can see your reactions to things. And also, please stay muted until ready to speak. And don't forget to unmute when you are ready to speak, which I have just, done. So I think at this point, Liliana was going to call roll, right?
Yes, you're correct.
Awesome. Dr. Balmes and Davina Hurt and Vice Mayor Hurt, we've heard from them today. Jana Gagnon. Nayamin. We saw her earlier. Here. Hi. Paula Torado.
Here.
Miss Margaret Gordon. Kevin Hamilton. Jesse Marquez. Luis Olmedo.
Here.
Dave Edwards.
Present.
Paul English.
Here, and note I'm no longer with California Department of Public Health, so I'm not in a health agency category anymore. NGO, which doesn't look like there is a category for that.
Yeah, but the first line is correct. Tracking California Public Health Institute, right?
Okay, thanks for that.
I hate to say it, you're still an academic.
Will Barrett. Erica Manuel. Instead of Veronica, we have Suma here.
Yes, I'm here and I'll be off camera momentarily. Thank you. On camera, rather.
Thanks, Suma. Catherine.
Here.
We have Jess Olson.
Yep, I'm here.
From the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District. Tung. Roger Isom. Do we have Christine Zimmerman?
Hi, everyone. I'm here.
Hi, Christine. Christine Wolf.
Here.
Michael Jarrett,
I'm here.
oh, okay, thanks. And Michael Kleiman, all right, thanks, everyone.
Liliana?
Yeah.
I did get a chat from Naomi. She is here, but she'll be off camera. She is sick and so is not going to be able to speak. She'll be participating through the chat.
Okay, I hope you feel better, Naomi. Okay, great.
Thank you all for joining us, and get well, Naomi. So I think we have our next slide, or maybe not. No, we're hiding slides. So our previous meeting was held, let's see, December the 8th, 2022. And just to refresh our memories, we discussed the upcoming but now approved community recommendations and the communities and how communities not yet in the program needed guidance and resources to apply or self-nominate. We also discussed that grants can help communities build capacity. An additional thing we discussed was the Blueprint 2.0 update and the engagement strategy with impacted community members, districts, government agencies, and others involved in the program. And lastly, we talked about the ad hoc governance work group and received an update on the charter process. So a lot was accomplished, and I think there will be a lot accomplished today. Our next item is a presentation around the transparency memo. And I will now hand it over to Co-Chair Balmes to frame us.
Actually, I don't think we're ready for that yet, right? Ellen, Chief Counsel,
Is she
isn't
not
here.
present? Oh, okay.
I
Well,
think.
Yeah, so
okay.
we should probably try the second
We should
item.
move on. Yes, we'll come back to it. Sorry about that, folks. I
No,
noticed she was not present with us. So let's then move on. Do we have Ms. Fletcher with us? Maybe we'll move on to the update on CARB civil rights efforts, and we'll return to that agenda item later. Chanel Fletcher?
I am here.
Bueller?
Oh, you said that, I was thinking that, so I'm glad that our minds are in sync right there. So yeah, so happy to talk a little bit about our civil rights efforts. And so if you were a part of one of our EJ stakeholder meetings in December, this will probably not be new information for you, but if you were not part of that, then this will be maybe a little bit of new information. So one of the things that I think that we know that's come up a lot in the implementation of AB 617 has been civil rights. And so we've really seen that in the People's Blueprint. And I think, as everyone knows, that is something that I think as we're moving forward with the program Blueprint, we have really committed to, I think, having as one of the topics that we're going to be discussing and incorporating. One of the things that, especially with Steve Cliff, our new executive officer coming on, this has been really a priority for him as he's been thinking about it, not just within the context of the 617 program, but really agency-wide. And so when we're talking about this, we really are thinking about the ways in which we are compliant and in compliance with Title VI, but how do we avoid those unintended disparate impacts has been, I think, a big kind of focal point for Steve. At his time at NHTSA, they had an Office of Civil Rights. And with that office, it really was a place where they were looking at and thinking through those unintended disparate impacts. And so one of the things that he's really charged me, and I'm working in collaboration with other deputies and division chiefs on, is really thinking about how we can secure additional resources for civil rights at CARB. And so I think when we're talking about this and we're looking at it, we really are thinking about some of the examples that we've gotten through. For example, I don't know if folks are aware, the US EPA had in a proposed disapproval of our San Joaquin Valley PM 2.5 SIP. And a lot of that was coming from Title VI. And so that was kind of one, I think, place where we were thinking about, again, getting additional resources and thinking through that approach of those unintended disparate impacts would be huge. We've also seen this, and I think in some of our climate programs, for example, right? So it's not just, I think, again, like 617 that we're thinking about this, but it's really a comprehensive approach. And so right now we are very much in kind of the initial stages of this and really thinking through the securing those additional resources and getting really clear in some of the ways in which those additional resources we can do, I think, additional work around training. So making sure that everyone kind of understands civil rights, they understand our current process and our current approach to it, and they understand, I think, the complaints process. So that's one of the big things that we're thinking about. We're thinking about how we staff up our Office of Racial Equity in a way where we're also kind of working with each of our divisions and the programmatic and the policies and our processes and actions to really think about how we're building in and incorporating civil rights as a part of that. And then we're also thinking about how we're coordinating and supporting both, I think, our own legal division and thinking about making sure that we have those added resources there as we're moving forward with this, because obviously civil rights, having that legal advice is going to be huge. So those are some of the components. Again, we're very much in kind of the phase 1 brainstorming. Steve had shared this in December, that this is something that he wants to do. And so I have been, like I said, working with a number of deputies and division chiefs on this. I did want to give this update because I know that that's been a big focal point for the 617 program. And so, as I think I've said before, obviously when we're talking about the program blueprint, you'll see that in the program blueprint. But for us at CARB, we really don't want to just be our 617 program. We want to see that agency-wide. So I will pause there and happy to answer any questions.
So I could just make a comment, if I might, Chanel, as I really appreciate Dr. Cliff's and your leadership in this area. It's long overdue for CARB to examine its policies and programs in light of our very much desire to be transparent and an advocacy agency, an ally for social equity as well as environmental justice. So I really appreciate it. And I know it's an early phase, but I think, I appreciate that we're embarking on what's going to be a long journey that will hopefully make the agency better in all its programs, not just AB 617. So I wanted to thank you. Anybody else before we have another related presentation?
Any questions? I guess now is the time to raise your hand. And just for everybody, Chanel Fletcher is our Deputy Executive Officer of Environmental Justice, Tribe and Tribal Relations, rather, to talk about, so just so the public is aware. And I don't see any hands raised, and I don't see anything in the chat. So I guess we can move on to our next presentation.
I think Chanel was going to introduce Payam.
I am on it. Thank you so much. And apologies for not doing the introduction there. I will turn it over to Payam. He is the manager within our Equal Opportunity Office, and he'll be sharing more about our civil rights process and the complaint process.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I hope you guys are all doing well. And for the ones who are not doing well, I hope you feel better very soon. So I just wanted to touch base a little bit and share about our civil rights policy, where to find it, and basically the complaint process and what forms to use, just so it's aware for the public. And I will share my screen in a moment. So currently I am I'm the head of the EEO office, which is known as the Equal Employment Opportunity Office. And we have several programs, and one of them includes the investigations of external complaints, which we call the civil rights complaints. And we have a policy for that as well, the civil rights policy. So for internal complaints with employees within CARB, I'm known as the EEO officer, but then for the external complaints that come in, I am the civil rights officer. And under that policy, it's pursuant to state and federal laws. We make sure our objective is to provide fair and equal access to the benefits of a program or activity that's administered either by CARB or subcontractors, contractors, or grantees that basically represent CARB and work for CARB also, or provide services to the public. So under our policy, discrimination can occur if there is some type of unlawful denial, or if there is not fair and equal access to one of our programs that are either offered or conducted. And it usually has to go off a protected basis or a protected class. And so if some of you, just for knowledge for the group, protected characteristic or protected class, such as something you are born with or experience with later on in life, such as age, race, ethnicity, religion, national origin, and etc. So in general, when the complaints come in, we look to see if they are in violation of our policy, our civil rights policy. And let me show you where to find that. Let me share my screen. Let's see. Can everyone see the screen? Okay,
Yeah.
everyone can see. Okay, great. So this is on CARB's external website. It talks a little bit about the EEO office and what we do. So for the employees who are internal and also for the members of public. And on our public website, we have a link which talks about the civil rights complaints, and I'll go into it. In that webpage as well, discusses what basically constitutes the civil rights complaints. We have the federal laws in there, the state laws in there. And for persons who want to file a complaint that are from the public, we have both the policy and the complaint form. Here is our civil rights policy and the discrimination complaint process. It is very easy to read. I'll go over a couple little things just to share a little bit. So members of the public, as you can see in the middle, who believe they were unlawfully denied full and equal access to a CARB program may file the civil rights complaint. And just for some basic knowledge about what the definitions are, the person who files the complaint is the complainant. And it also talks about the type of discrimination that can occur based on a protected class, which we talked about a little earlier. And the procedures, a little bit about procedures. They can come in to our office directly. We like to have them written, but regardless, when they contact us, we will reach out to that person, the complainant. Let's see. Oh, side note, that's kind of critical, important. There is a 1-year limit for the complaints to come in, but there is an additional 90-day granted if the person or the complainant obtains the knowledge after 1 year. So I'll explain to you a little bit about how the process works. A person may file a complaint in any way they please. We like to have it in writing, but they can contact us by phone and they could fill out the form and send it to us. They can email us. And once they do that, we meet with them. We analyze the complaint and compare it to the civil rights policy. So this includes, meeting with the complainant, person who filed the complaint, and we conduct an intake. We gather all the relevant facts, all the information, and all the details. And we look to see if, based on the information provided, based on the evidence that was provided, would this be a violation of our civil rights policy? Now, sometimes when persons file a complaint, it may not meet our civil rights policy per se. So we usually communicate that with the complainant. So if it doesn't meet our policy violation, but it potentially has some other items that need to be addressed, I, or whoever I designate, we forward the complaint to a party within CARB. So I will let the complainant know, either in writing or verbally, before we facilitate that transfer for it to be addressed. If an investigation is warranted, so if on the surface, after meeting with the complainant, finding all the documentation and reviewing, if it is warranted, myself or one of our investigators would look into those allegations and conduct a prompt, neutral, and very thorough investigation. We present, we review all the facts, we collect all the statements, and we reach a determination whether or not this violates our policy. So there's another side of this. Sometimes complaints come in and they're not against CARB itself, but against other entities, contractors, subcontractors, or a CARB grantee. And based on our review, if we have a reason to believe or think that violation under state law has occurred, we notify the grantees, we notify the contractors, and we forward the complaint to the California Civil Rights Department. So for the entities that are either a grantee for CARB or a contractor or subcontractor. If the complaint is against CARB and we do find a policy violation, we take appropriate action to respond to the findings and solve the matter. So I will real quick show you what the form looks like. And this is all on our external website for the civil rights. Here is the complaint form. It's 3 pages long, but it's very self-explanatory. The complainant name, the program information, and their address are critical, so we know how to contact them. There's a section for the basis of the complaint where they explain what has happened, why they believe it's discriminatory, where did it occur, if there were any witnesses, and one thing they have to fill out is a protected class. So basically, what were they discriminated against? And as you can see, there are some of the characteristics of the classes: race, origin, ancestry, religion, etc. And the second part of it is basically talking about what the CARB program or subcontractor, grantee, etc. And they sign it and they fill it out and they send it to myself, or they send it to the EEO office. Okay, so that is pretty much what I wanted to share with you guys today. Does anyone have any questions for me?
So maybe you can stop sharing, and I see Paul English has his hand raised.
Oh, Payam, I was just wondering, could you go into a little more detail when you say, if a violation has occurred, could you go into a little more detail? What are the appropriate actions that are taking? Are there fines, or what are those actions? that occur?
So it depends on each specific situation and each complaint that is brought forward. They're all very strategized and a little different. So that's, for me, that's a broad answer because everyone is a little bit different. Every complaint that comes in.
Can you give some examples or a range of actions that might occur?
So that one I can definitely share with you maybe offline a little bit. But usually there's not many fines imposed, if that's one of the questions, like monetarily wise.
Okay. Any further thoughts or questions from folks on this item? Co-Chair Balmes, I'm just trying to quickly look. You don't see anyone with their hand raised.
I don't.
Okay. Well, we do have time to have a discussion with all that we've heard today. Thank you for the presentation. And if you could stop sharing your screen, that'd be really helpful.
Is it still sharing?
Yeah.
It's just showing a, a black screen.
Oh.
Excuse me, this is Miss Margaret. I did have my hand up. I don't know if y'all saw me.
Well, I'm glad you're here, Miss Margaret.
I'm having
Yes.
technical difficulties here.
I hope you're feeling well too.
I know how to, I'm walking and talking.
Well, I can hear you talking, that's for sure.
Okay, hey, I can't do no running. I can't do too much jumping, but I can do a lot of walking and talking.
Not yet, not yet.
Anyway, your
Not
hand was raised.
No,
Yeah,
Yeah, my hand was raised.
so
yeah.
go ahead.
it's your
Okay.
floors to you.
First, I know I'm late, and I'm sorry. Who was the speaker about the civil rights or the Title VI complaint process? Who was that?
That would be me, Payam Ahmadi.
Okay, Almani, okay, let me just say this here. You have not been participating in the standing meeting we have had with Chanel, have you?
Which standing meeting?
Chanel, can you,
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
jump in here. So
Yes,
just so
please.
just so you know, Miss Margaret, so Payam is here today to speak about the civil rights process. He has not been participating in the standing meetings because his who he reports to, which is Deputy Executive Officer Edna Murphy, she has been in those meetings. So Edna Murphy, she's oversees our internal efforts. And she's also kind of has been the point on the equal opportunity or equal employment office. So that's why Payam hasn't been there, because we've had Edna in those meetings.
Okay, but we never, through our meetings, had a recommendation, suggestion that he would come to this meeting to talk about anything about civil rights or Title VI. It was never on our agenda for him to come to do any of these things.
And you're talking about the meetings that we've been having with you and Richard Grow, right?
I'm saying for the last 4 months that we've been meeting, we never agreed that there was going to be a presentation at the AB 617 consultation meeting on this item.
Okay, I'm only pausing because I know that unfortunately I haven't been able to make it to all the coordination meetings. So I'm looking probably, Delgy, to you for the coordination of the agenda setting meetings.
I'm not talking about Delta, I'm talking about the meetings that you and I have had with the other
Okay,
staff
that's
and
helpful.
with Richard Rowe. And with Richard
Those
Rowe.
meetings, okay,
Yes, we never agreed
okay.
that anyone would come and make a presentation at this AB 617 consultation meeting around Title VI or civil rights.
So I'll just chime in and say that that is true. So we never agreed to that because with those meetings, my understanding was that we were talking about a collaborative effort around working discussions on Title VI. And so that, and I'm sorry that I wasn't clear, those meetings that we've been having with you and Richard Groh and the other staff, they're not meant to supplant the meetings that 617 team has to plan for the agendas for the Title VI meetings. So in my minds, they're parallel efforts. I know that you came in late. So I shared, oh wait, I'm almost done. So I shared before you got here that we were doing this kind of bigger kind of conversation that we had where Steve had shared that he wanted to kind of create this Office of Civil Rights. And we're thinking about the resources that are needed for that. So that's one track, and that's agency-wide. And so the conversations that we were having with you and Richard, and I think the team for that are meant to be agency-wide, right? Focusing on those resources and how we build up some of the training and the knowledge. And then I think parallel to that is what's happening in 617 as it relates to civil rights. And that space, that is where the team is having those agenda setting meetings with members to figure out what gets on the agenda.
Okay, I'm gonna say this here, and I hope everybody here. This presentation just happened. It's a day late and $1 short because it should have happened 3 years ago, 4 years ago when AB 617 consultation should have happened. We had to wait until different events have happened at different sites. And for me, he kept pushing the envelope about the issue of civil rights and Title VI. That is part of the problem here, that nobody listens, really pays attention to those things that should be considered about fairness and supporting fairness in these situations that happen at the individual sites. This is just this whole presentation came about because I have pushed the envelope for 3 years to talk about this issue. And all of a sudden now, it became a priority at the consultation meeting to have this conversation today. Whereas that it was never constituted recommended amongst of us who have been meeting on the item. I feel it's very disingenuous.
So I see Belinda's hand is raised, and I think I have a comment too, and then we'll see if any additional folks have some thoughts.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a little bit of context in how this presentation was brought about, and just to kind of respond to what you mentioned, Ms. Margaret, which is that there were some issues that were brought about in the AB 617 realm, and as you aptly noted that the AB 617 forum was not really the right place to bring about resolution to these issues. And then you also had mentioned previously that the civil rights policy and the discrimination complaint process was not widely known to members in the CSCs. So that's one of the reasons why we brought this this presentation forward for this meeting in response to that. But then also too why Deputy Executive Officer Chanel Fletcher also shared earlier in this meeting why we have kind of a more broader, higher level of response to the necessity to incorporate civil rights into our CARB processes, and why we're working with you to do that. So that's helpful. I'm hoping that kind of gives you.
No, it's not helpful because nobody's not helpful, because you should have spent some time doing some pre-work or giving an orientation to the sites of why you was doing that. You did not communicate. No one has communicated to the sites that this was going to happen, for them to be aware that you was going to do this presentation.
Understood.
No, I want you understood. I want you to really understand that you cannot, that's part of the unfairness. that you don't know how to be fair about information and communication. Because you would have never done that if you had a reasonable amount of skill building to understand you have to be more, extend yourself to all of us at these sites of why you're doing this. And it did not happen like that way. It didn't come across in the agenda setting for this meeting that you was going to do this.
So, Ms. Margaret, I was in the last agenda setting meeting and it was discussed. I would say, you know, we thank you for keeping us.
Discuss, and the information being having awareness that is coming is two different things. That's what I'm talking about.
I do hear what you're saying, and I think there's much more work that we need to do around this when it comes to orientation. And I think this is the start of that work and just growing and building on everybody's knowledge together so that we can definitely protect the civil rights of all people in AB 617.
Like I said earlier, you're a day late and $1 short. This should have happened 3 years ago.
I do hear you say that, and I hope we can move forward growing, that there's more that we need to do together. And I see Deldy's hand raised, and hopefully we could just move forward positively with the work around protecting civil rights together.
Yeah, the missing piece here is how do you heal the miscommunication and the dialogue that I have been asked about for 3 years. Where is the healing at? Where is the process to say that people are going to be trained and educated how to pursue this process?
I think it's a good question.
Turn on a dime of somebody saying, "Oh, we heard." That is not being collaborative or coordinating the information and the communication of what's need to be done.
So I do hear you. I'm going to turn to Deldy, and I also have a thought around that. But I think it's a good question. You know, how do we move forward positively and do the healing that's required? And so Deldy, if you could.
Yeah, I would just say, in the interest of healing, it is important, Ms. Margaret, as you suggest, that for us to learn so that we can do better. I know my team and I are trying very hard to do that. There are a lot of things that are important to a lot of people in the 617 program. You can look at our agenda and there's like a bunch that just lift up. I hear your comment too about how the sites, the communities, the 617 community steering committees, how we should and are engaging them on civil rights. The other point though, the reality there is that those community steering committees are on their own paths. They have a lot on their plate. We at CARB cannot just turn to them and say, oh, we need an hour on your agenda. As you know, you actually have recently schooled us when we reached out to you and you thought we wanted to talk to the entire West Oakland steering committee, right? When in fact we didn't, but you did remind us that there was a process for us to follow for that. So we cannot at our level just dictate to the CSCs that we will take time from their agendas to talk about anything really, right? We have liaisons there who share highlights. We always remind people of important dates at the CSC meeting. Like here's a consultation group meeting that's happening, or here's a board meeting that's happening. But I just want us to think about the other perspective here in terms of how we reach people. It's a lot of moving parts, and it's not just up to us at CARB.
I also welcome other consultation group members to maybe chime in on some of their thoughts about, AB 617 and sites and integrating the civil rights orientation and policy. I now will acknowledge Luis Omango.
Thank you. So a thought that comes to mind is that in reading the policy, I think it says it was adopted in 2016. April 11, 2016. It's been a while. Well, I have several questions, but one is what is the level of confidence that this policy is relevant to so much that has been learned and so much policy and expectations that now exist at the federal level, at the state level? Because my understanding is that CARB, being a recipient of federal funds, also has to comply with federal policy, right? So my first question is, does CARB at this point in time feel confident that this policy meets those standards?
Anybody from staff want to comment, or Abigail? And maybe this is a question that we would have to go back and.
I'm happy to provide a brief response. We at CARB believe that this is compliant with current rules and regulations, but I will acknowledge that we welcome feedback on the policy itself. And you've heard from Chanel about the bigger picture efforts, about many different efforts to try to infuse civil rights obligations into individualized programs. And so that will be more of a very specific to the programs themselves. And also, others might be aware this is publicly available information. The Civil Rights Department is proposing to amend their implementing regulations for Government Code 11135. And so to the extent that any state or federal laws change over time, CARB is reviewing those and will be updating the policies as appropriate to make sure that we continue to be in compliance. But I'll circle back to say that these types of engagement forums are really important to CARB to be able to hear feedback from, directly from community members and other stakeholders about how we can ensure that we are in compliant as well. We are a government agency. We seek to not only be transparent, but accountable to our obligations. And so we appreciate any feedback that you have as well. And I'll stop there. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
And apologize, I did not introduce myself. I'm Abigail May. I'm a senior attorney at CARB. Thank you.
Thank you. And I also see Ellen Peter with her hand raised. Did you want to add on to Abigail's thoughts?
I just wanted to basically endorse what Abigail said. We would not bring anything forward to this group, and we would not put anything out publicly unless we believed it complied with the law. But also there are more expansions, there's more nuances or implementation, all of that we are, as Abigail already noted, Chanel already noted, we would like that input. And one additional piece of information that I got about 2 weeks ago is US EPA Office of Environmental Justice is also an Office of Civil Rights is coming out with new guidelines. And I was told informally that they thought that would be out in about another 8 weeks. Having worked with US EPA on a lot of things, this is coming out of headquarters. I suspect it'll be longer than that. And once again, that will give us that, this is all incoming new information, and we would most likely revise our documents to reflect anything new. So it's a dynamic process, it's an iterative process, and what's before you we think is fine, as Abigail already indicated, but also it's going to be it's going to continue to improve with everybody's input. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Did you have another question or would like to talk some more?
I did. I don't want to be wrong in the way I address you, Your Honor, Vice Mayor, Board Member,
Co-chair,
Co-chair.
All of those work, Luis.
all those
All
work.
of those. Yeah. So you have Abigail, and thank you for that response, as well as Ellen. Just to get a sort of a temperature check, would the legal and CARB have a gauge temperature as to, does this 2016 policy meet the minimal requirements, the maximum requirements? Does CARB right now independently see opportunity to improve that policy? I understand what sort of the offer is, that CARB is open to other commenters' opinions, but does CARB at this moment identify opportunities to improve this April 2016 policy? And the other part of it is, does CARB feel it meets the minimal requirements, or is there another level that CARB feels it's at with this 2016 policy?
This is Abigail May again, Senior Attorney with CARB. I don't think I would feel comfortable saying whether it meets a minimum or maximum. I feel comfortable saying that it's consistent with the law. But we at CARB, as you can see by the policy statement, are committed to prohibiting discrimination in all of our programs and activities. And therefore, because of that, we welcome feedback in order to make this meet our mission statement, which is not only to be compliant with all applicable laws, but also to be meeting our mission statement of ensuring that there's air quality for all Californians. So we want to be at the maximum level in all cases, whether we're meeting our mission statement or meeting our civil rights obligations. And so that's why I think this conversation is ongoing. And so I'm not going to be here today saying that this is the maximum, because I'm sure that we're going to see continuing updates and improvements, particularly in discussions that are going to continue with this group as part of the update to the blueprint process.
Thank you, Abigail. I see in where it says discrimination, and it's got a prescribed list. Does CARB feel that that prescribed list is exhaustive of meeting the 2023 laws and regulations, that anything that may have happened between 2016 and 2023?
So I'm going to actually decline to answer that, just because I think it's hard to when there could be particular complaints that come in that could be found to meet the definition of discrimination, might not be in that list. So I would prefer to not answer that. And so if Pi would like to answer, or we can continue this conversation about whether that list should be expanded. But I did note that the Civil Rights Department has a 45-day comment period right now, proposing amendments to their regulations implementing Government Code 11135. And if I'm recalling correctly, there is a list of proposed types of discrimination that are in that proposed amendments list.
Can I ask a question? I'm going to ask a question. When the two Black women were removed from the Sacramento steering committee, can you tell me that you wrote Abigail an opinion about that removal?
So I'm going to jump in here. I'm sorry.
I'm asked the question. I asked the question because I asked the question.
I was going to ask.
Did you, who in your staff and Abigail's staff wrote an opinion about the two Black women who was removed from the Sacramento steering committee?
So, Ms. Margaret, this is Ellen Peter. I'm the chief counsel, and Abigail works for me, as I think you know. And I want to take the responsibility for the legal work. I do take the responsibility for the legal work at CARB. So I'm going to answer this question because I'm the one that's responsible. We did not write an opinion on that.
Thank you.
And there was no complaint. So we aren't required to write an opinion.
What do you mean it was not a complaint? Your staff was there to see how, staff was there for CARB to saw how the removal happened. So you mean to tell me nobody would step up from your department to say that's discriminatory.
So, Ms. Margaret, is my recollection, and I have to go back, and maybe the better thing to do is take a pause here and go back and the facts. I think people did reach out to her, and I believe there was some resolutions, but I can't speak to that right now. Also, that committee is not a CARB committee. That was a air district committee, I believe.
Even though with the air, but the air district received money from CARB, and
That's
CARB
true.
staff was sitting in the room.
You're absolutely correct.
So if I can jump in really quickly.
Let me say this here. Y'all
Ms.
playing.
Margaret, just for one moment, I think Luis allowed you to ask a question, but there are two others with their hands raised that have been waiting in the queue. And so maybe if you could shorten your comment, we can go to those that have been
Okay,
waiting.
I'm just saying, there's games being played. There is inconsistencies there's been a lot of inconsistencies here. There's a lot of fanfare here, but does not conclude of fairness here. I'm not hearing fairness.
Thank you, Ms. Margaret, for your comments. Luis, can we move to Paula, or did you have a further thought?
I had one more, if that's acceptable. Just one quick question.
Okay, if we could do that, Paula and then Kevin.
So under responsibility, and please don't interpret my comment at all. This is a 2016 policy, but it did catch my attention that at the time, CARB's executive officer will have final authority and responsibility for compliance with this policy. Now, there are two, I would say, major elements or governance within the California Air Resources Board governance structure. And one is the governance that happens within the staff, and one is the governance that happens within the authority of the board. And I'm just curious if legal would help explain how, if CARB's executive officer sort of where the buck stops, what happens in a scenario that I hope would never happen in any director, but just playing devil's advocate. What if the concern was regarding the executive officer? So what does that look like under this policy for the individual submitting the complaint?
So Co-Chair Hurt, I can answer that real quickly if that's useful.
Thank you.
So Luis, good question. What we would do if a complaint, a Title VI or any other kind of complaint is filed against the executive officer, that would then go under our policy, and it would be referred to our EEO, our civil rights policy, PI. And if it was a situation where it was the executive officer who was the complaint, then I would personally take it to the chair of the board, and we would bring it to the full board, because we would take that very seriously. If there was a complaint, we don't just obviously accept, any allegations as true. We would just initiate the process. But just because the executive officer is the violator, that would not insulate the executive officer from that obligations. And the board, and you have two of the board members here who can speak to it, they are responsible for the executive officer. They're going to have an annual review of that executive officer in the fall. Once the current one completes the review, it will be in closed session. It will be a review of their performance. Same idea. If there was a complaint about that, myself as chief counsel, because I report to the board, I don't report to, I have a dotted line to the executive officer and a dotted line to the board. My responsibility is for CARB. So I can assure you, Luis, if there was a complaint against the executive officer, the current one or a future one, the chief counsel would take it to the board.
Thank you. And I did have a follow-up, if I may. Again, I'm not making me feel uncomfortable to even bring that scenario. But, you know, it's just a scenario that could be picked out of here of multiple scenarios. But in a scenario, just playing devil's advocate here, maybe you're not even that, but be more direct. There is, I would say, in most cases, the fear of filing complaints when you don't have sort of, there's more avenues to follow. Like, for example, if I were a victim in a scenario such as that, and if I knew kind of the buck stops according to this policy here, well, then I'm probably less likely to file a complaint, because then, you know, I'd be nervous about filing a complaint where my only avenue is this route, and hoping, you know, that legal catches it and then runs it through a different vehicle, which I'm not reading in the policy itself. So I'm just wondering if CARB, kind of listening to this dialogue, is perhaps thinking, hey, there's some room here to kind of improve this policy, because, you know, we don't know what we don't know if it's not written in a policy, and if there isn't different avenues depending on the scenarios playing out. I mean, I feel bad that it's the executive, you know, that I'm using as an example, but, you know, I'm sure we can draw a lot more examples. Victims need to have more ways and options to assure that they are not reporting to their aggressors. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm using probably bad terminology.
That's a really good point. I think we can include that in the next draft. Part of it is, it was in 2016. There can be a lot of changes. The federal policies are changing, the state policies are changing, and we absolutely commit to bringing everything up to date and considering every single comment, including that one that you made, Luis, and I totally will put that on the list. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. Oh, Abigail, did you want to?
I just wanted to thank Ellen and say that is true, and there are other agencies that complaints can be filed with, and so we can make sure that we're being very transparent about that, about the other agencies where complaints can be filed that are not CARB, where a complaint can be filed against CARB or against a CARB grantee or contractor or subcontractor. So thank you, Luis.
Great point. I missed that. Thank you, Abigail. So improvements coming.
Yeah, thank you for the comments. I'd like to call Paula. Paula, thanks for being so patient.
No worries. I wanted to make sure that all the thoughts were captured. I wanted to say that it seems like something's missing of this process, going back to Ms. Margaret, that this is falling short, perhaps because this is a 2016 policy, meaning like AB 617 was like extending already as a program in 2017, but it's an old policy. And because of the things that have happened in the steering committees that have had issues on discriminatory issues, racist issues, it seems like the lessons learned of all of those issues haven't been translated to this process that we're doing right now. So that's why sort of coming up to this presentation, it feels like something's missing. Like, okay, we know this policy was there, but if it had been implemented in the way that it should have been implemented, then maybe the issues we had with steering committee members being kicked out wouldn't have happened, right? So there's something missing in terms of like translating the lessons or in a way that it's not harmful, translating the lessons learned or the better practices to ensure that not only there's compliance, but that we're going above and beyond to ensure that that we're abiding by that, and also what's stopping us from making them stronger. So yes, revising the policy, but just sort of acknowledging that there was harm done, and that that's the step that needs to be sort of inserted in here before like we go and move on into the policy. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think as process, this would have this presentation would have landed a little bit differently if we are talking it in the context of, these issues happened, we recognize it, there was this policy that wasn't implemented well, or that it was, old and needs to be revised. but also for the future, how can we do that better? Because what's stopping us from doing that?
Thank you. Great comments.
Thank you, Paula, for your comments. I now see Kevin Hamilton.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Great discussion. Let me just get my hand down there. So a couple of things. The first is, the best approach is apologize, identify what happened, agree to it, apologize to it, and then start describing how we'll be sure it doesn't happen again. So in our world, my world, I have to own it. It sounds like Ms. Peters is owning it there. I mean, we just have to. This is a 2016 policy. One of the biggest gaps I see in it is there's no way for somebody who could send it in anonymously. The requirement that somebody actually put their name in it is upfront going to discourage some people from doing that, because as you heard from Miss Margaret quite eloquently, there's a lack of trust. The old, what do they say, trust but verify. I don't necessarily agree with that, but you should be able to trust. And the fact is that this policy is here in this complaint form. I've been hanging around CARB longer than a lot of the people on this room, and I didn't know it existed. So, and I've certainly never seen that form. And Miss Margaret's point that when we were working on this idea of Title VI, it would have been great to see that form when we started working on it almost 3 years ago now. Would have been very useful, but that's all water under the bridge. We have to move forward. We have the form now. We're having a good discussion about it, a robust discussion. I appreciate that. I swear, Luis, if you come up with one more scenario, I'm going to have to hurt you though. But all are valid. And I think that's the filter that we have to put it through, right? Is there a scenario that, and the one that always comes is the idea that was just mentioned by my colleague at PSRLA, Paula, and to a certain extent, Luis, and I believe Ms. Margaret as well, is this idea that there's fear involved here, fear of repercussions, fear of just exposing something like this has happened to yourself. So, there needs to be not just a form, but it sounds like there's a department again that I didn't know about, that, where people can go talk to somebody prior to doing that, maybe, and do that discreetly in a space where walking through the door won't notify all the rest of the employees that, hey, they're going in that office down there. So, having worked for the federal government for a while, where that's the way it was. In fact, the EOC office was right near the cafeteria and the store. So if you walked in there, everybody knew that you were going in there. There's only one reason to go in there. So, just using discretion. And again, the form is a good faith effort. I certainly wouldn't disagree that it meets the spirit of, or the standard. It's enough to meet the standard. I hate those words. Government is really good at that. We're meeting the standard, yes, but we should all be seeking to exceed the standard. I was always taught to strive for excellence, and so that means the standard is the base. I don't want to be the base. I want to be the peak of the roof. So, I think that CARB has moved forward in addressing equity in communities much better than a number of the other agencies that I work with, and I appreciate that about CARB. And I think because of that, CARB's taken a lot of hits that it might have dodged otherwise if it just stayed CTC, or like CEC is trying to climb out now, or even worse, a couple of other players. But I think this revision doesn't need to wait. We've already identified places in this form it could be improved, and there is no law stopping you, again, from exceeding what the minimum standard is. And I think that's where the problem lies, is you can and have always been able to exceed that. There is nothing saying that you can't. So those things, if you do, and it's a problem, it'll be tested in the courts, and we'll find out, won't we? And then sort of blindsiding us with things. I watched the chat, And I see that my good friend and colleague of 20 years has been forced to step off a committee simply because she signs a contract, which is ludicrous. She has no decision-making process in that contract. There's no way that anybody could suggest that it's a conflict of interest. Yet, and Ms. Peters, maybe you can explain this to me, why CEC has chose to interpret it a little differently. Whereas I can sign a contract over there as long as I'm not in the budget, I'm fine. But you guys have decided that even signing the contract stops you from being able to serve on one of these committees. And so we lose some of our best talent and some of our best minds when we need them the most. But again, felt blindsided by that. Everybody did and still does. We should never be blindsided. When there's a new reg or law that comes around and you're going to have to write a new regulation to meet that standard, we should all know. We should all know that that's happening.
So Kevin,
that's the communication piece, right? Where we're
Kevin,
just sending emails and letting us know. So John, I
jump
hear
in?
you.
Yeah, we actually, we mentioned it before you joined, I think. That was going to be the first item today, was to talk about the policy.
Oh, I missed it. Yeah. At another
Ellen was in
meeting.
conflict with another meeting. She's here now. So that's actually going to be the next item.
Oh, great. Great. So I'll leave you with that. And
I don't disagree
look
with you
forward to
about
hearing the story.
I don't disagree with you about the consequence of losing a valued member of the consultation group, but
Makes no sense. I think we need to go to the
we'll talk
AG.
about it in a bit.
We need to get an opinion from the AG on this. I mean, if it's that dramatic and it's going to have that kind of opinion, anything, it's going to have that kind of impact, not just this, but if it's going to affect community residents and those of us working in communities or anybody outside of the agency itself, then there needs to be a decision from the top. But all right, I'll let it go.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
We'll get back to it.
Thank you.
Jesse, I see your hand raised. You're on mute.
While Jesse's unmuting, we've heard that it's hard for people to know who's talking. So please introduce yourself whenever you first speak. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Jesse Marquez. I'm part of the Wilmington, Carson, West Long Beach CSC committee, and I'm with the Coalition for a Safe Environment headquartered in Wilmington. All of us that are part of this committee all recognize and realize that the AB 617 program is the first of its kind. There has never been any other type of legislative proposal that's similar to this that we can use as a model. And so I recognize that, every year we will be encountering situations, where we don't have an answer for, or we may not have the resources at hand to be able to research it or personnel at hand to be able to answer the questions. But we must understand that, it is part of our directive to, smooth things out. If we discover 1 year or the second year to the third year, oops, we never got to this particular item or this subject, then yes, then it's time for it to come up and to be addressed. And yes, there may be laws, rules, regulations, and policies. Well, basically, every year something would need to be updated because every year there are new laws that are kicking in both on the state level and the federal level. And so it's very difficult to even keep up with those. But, because we are an open public, program and committee and subcommittees that are meeting that, on our website, we may need to then call out what needs to be included in our website. If the Title VI information needs to be added to the website, then maybe we need to list it under the resources, Every year, every meeting, there are going to be a few new people for the first time coming on board that know no history. So the first thing they're going to do is go to our website. And so it's important that our website do have resources. Just like you passed out the CARB Advisory Committee transparency requirements, that would be another type document that would be on that website as a resource where they know these are the things that govern us. And then that'll facilitate us having less problems in the future, but at least we can say for 2023, this is what we did. These were the actions and activities and modifications we met to our website. These were the documents that came to us for a review. And we met with the committee, we met with CARB staff and other agencies to answer that question or to to explain it better, so that the common words are out there for the public to understand, and that there's always a link to who would be a staff resource to be able to address some of those things. And that's what I wanted to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. I don't see any additional hands raised to the panelists, so I think this is a perfect time to go to public comments and see if we have any public. Oh,
Yeah. And there's one person who's been trying to get our attention, Joelle Tony.
okay. So let's move to public comments then. And then I do see one hand raised, so I'll quickly come back to you, Luis, before we then move on to our next topic that Ellen Peters here for. So do we have any public comments? Hers, let's see. There are a number of attendees. Anyone who'd like to make a comment?
And I think Joelle dropped off.
Oh, okay.
She left a comment in the chat. I mean, in the Q&A. Sorry.
Okay. All right. I don't see any hands raised for public comments. So Luis, let's move back to you and then we'll move on to our next agenda item. Luis?
Yeah, thank you. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to kind of have a conversation through all of this. Just something that came to mind because I did read the ombudsman, and I've always thought about the ombudsman of more being like a facilitator for industry or business altogether, just business. But I wrote here on the chat, ombudsman is listed. It's not clear their role in civil rights. Is ombudsman deputized, trained, certified to handle civil rights complaints? But I just use that as an example. But in general, what is the criteria and certification required? An example, like I know, like first responders, they have a training, kind of like just triage, emergency response. There's HIPAA compliance. There's mandatory reporters, etc. There's all these certifications. So I'm just curious: is there a certification that exists to certify civil rights violation handlers within CARB to prevent unintended harm or mishandling of reports? I hope it's a fair question, so just curious to know if there's anything like that exists within CARB.
Okay, I see Deldy's hand is raised.
Yeah, just for purposes of our conversation today, I do think it is very important for us to verbalize the comment that Ms. Tony left in the Q&A. So if it's okay, I just want to read that for everyone. Kevin Hamilton was able to skip in front of me. I have another meeting that I need to attend in 1 minute, so I'm going to post it here. I'm one of the Black women who was removed from the Sacramento AB 617 steering committee. I wanted to clarify that we did co-author a complaint and send it to CARB. Earlier, it was stated that a complaint wasn't sent. That is false. So that is her comment in the Q&A. I just wanted to verbalize that.
Thank you. And I maybe should add to the public, we routinely go through the panelists first, all the questions that the panelists have, and then we move on to public comments. And I believe that's where Ms. Tony was. So we're so sorry that those times didn't coordinate. It wasn't a matter of skipping in front. It was taking all of the panelists first and then moving to public comments. So we're sorry that we were not able to hear from you directly, but thank you, Deldy, for reading that into the record.
Davina, could I just say, because she's already dropped off, could we reach out to her and tell her what Vice Mayor Hurt just said?
We will do that, Dr. Balmes. Thank you.
Thank you, Deldy.
Thank you, co-chairs Balmes. That's a great idea. And just so we can, I'm sure this is not the last time that we talk about this. I really appreciated the conversation, all the comments. And again, Ms. Margaret, thank you for keeping us accountable and continuing to elevate this conversation. If there aren't any other comment or hands raised, I think it's time for us to move on to our
next. If I may, I'm sorry to interrupt. Did I miss a response to my question, or is that for a later time?
I'm terribly sorry, Luis. I think maybe with all that was said, your question got lost. Would you like to ask it again? And we'll see if there's a proper response we can give to you in this moment.
Well, it's posted on the chat, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I guess the simple of it is, is there
about
a
certification.
training? Yeah, is there a training that exists within CARB? Because I know CARB has been trying to make improvements around a lot of the work that Chanel's doing, I think, in inclusion and diversity and all of that. I'm just wondering, is there a training that exists in CARB for, let's say, similar to Kevin, like we work on a lot of programs, including like health programs, where, you're a mandatory reporter, there's HIPAA compliance, there's all these certifications that are required by us. And I'm just wondering, to be a handler of civil rights complaints, is there a training certification that CARB maintains and the team that is certified that handle that? I'm just curious if that exists. If it doesn't exist, then it doesn't exist. Just wondering where CARB is in that.
Thank you, Luis, for the question, and it is in the chat. Thank you for restating it. Is there a direct answer?
Yeah, I'll chime in. And sorry, apologies, I had to step out for a minute, but I'm back. And so I think they'll be coming up in a little bit of the conversation. I think in terms of the training for the civil rights, I should probably just be clear to you that I think that is going to kind of require coordination with our deputy who's over internal operations, Edna Murphy. So maybe what I would propose here is being able to kind of circle back with Edna, get a better sense and understanding of, I think, what you're asking for, Luis, right? Which is like, what is that training? What does it entail? And then being able to come back to this group. Go ahead, Elton.
I would just flag, and maybe Ellen or Pi can speak to this, but I'm sure there is training for our civil rights investigators.
Yes, there's the people who are involved, either that we hire or we use as contractors, are trained. I actually don't know, Luis, if there is an actual civil rights certification. What is it possible in terms of the certification, but that is absolutely something we should look at. And I think that builds into implementing this whole expanded policy and this whole expanded staff that is going to be under Chanel Fletcher.
So I think there's training, and I think we will get back to you. I do feel like kind of some circling and coordination with I think Edna would be really appropriate in this front too.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm going to now hand it over to Co-Chair Balmes to frame our next agenda item.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Hurt. And I really appreciate that last conversation. Clearly we have to get back to folks about things, but I think it was a good conversation that I can speak for the agency that we're listening to all the comments and taking them very seriously. So this next topic is, what Kevin has already kind of introduced about the memo that was sent to all of you who are members of the consultation group about transparency. And I'm not going to detail the policy. That's what Ellen Peter is here for. But just to frame it a bit, CARB has 4 advisory committees that are subject to the Bagley-Keene Act, which is a legislative act, which we have to be in compliance with. And the consultation group is one of those 4 advisory committees. And some of you may also serve on EJAC, like Kevin, and that's another one of the advisory committees that's under the Bagley-Keene Act. So this transparency memo was posted online on the consultation group website in October of 2022, and emailed to the consultation group members in February. But just to be fair, in terms of Kevin saying he was blindsided, I was too. So we're here to unblind everyone. Ellen Peter, who's already spoken today, our chief counsel for CARB, is here to present details about the transparency memo. And after her presentation, she'll open the floor for questions. Though, of course, she might not be able to answer every question immediately today. So Ellen, take it away.
Thanks very much, Dr. Balmes. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ellen Peter. I'm the Chief Counsel at CARB, as I already stated. And so today's transparency presentation, as Dr. Balmes already indicated, it applies to every state agency and every state agency that has advisory committee. So this is not unique to us. This is statewide. And we had 4 advisory committees, Bagley-Keene advisory committees, the EJAC, this group, AB 617 Consultation Group, the Scientific Review Panel, and the Research Screening Committee. Those are the 4 that were there, but actually, Dr. Balmes, within the last day, we picked up a 5th one as well. And there's 2 bills that were passed by the legislature that also set up 2 new additional advisory committees. And the newest one is, let's see, the one that just came out is under AB 1757, it's the Natural and Working Land Expert Advisory Committee. So that was one, and then there will be a 6th one. So anyway, basically, this is not unusual. I think of these advisory committees, and I'll go through the 3 statutes in a little bit of detail. But I think of these elements is kind of fundamental fairness in the operation of state government. So in October 2022, we put out a public document on our webpage about these transparency requirements. We can send it to everyone again if you want to, but I want to go over kind of the outline of the 3 laws. And so as you can see on the screen, there is the conflict of interest laws, which are under Government Code Section 87104. There's the Bagley-Keene Open Meetings Act. And that's why we're on, this is a public meeting, it's noticed, people can make comments. This is actually a, just like our board meetings, this is a operation it's controlled by the Bagley-Keene Open Meetings Act. Everything has to be in the public. And the last transparency rule is the Public Records Act. And what this is basically anybody can ask any state agency for documents that they already have in their possession. And so there's all sorts of exemptions on that. So I'm going to run through these 3 laws right now. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Great. So the one that I already mentioned, this is Government Code Section 87104. Okay. And once again, I think of this as a fairness law. Everybody gets to treat the same. So what you can see on the screen here is that it prohibits advisory committee members from making certain kinds of appearances or communications. And the goal is if there is for the purpose of influencing a decision to CARB, and it's limited to contracts, grants, loans, licenses, permits, or other entitlements for use. So this is a statute that is mandatory. There is no discretion. It applies to every member of every advisory committee for any state agency. So it applies to this group here. And also it's important to know is who's responsible for this statute. So CARB is not responsible for enforcing this the statute. If there's any kind of violations, it's enforced by the courts, it's enforced by district attorneys, the Fair Political Practices Commission, commonly known as the FPPC. Those are the main people that are enforcing it. And it applies to public officials. Okay, and because each of the members of the AB 617 consultation group is considered a public official, because you're a member of the advisory group, then this wouldn't then apply to those members. So it applies for both actual conflicts of interest, and that would be, I know I'm signing a grant to give the money to myself. That would be a really blatant one, or also the appearance of conflicts. It's you know, once again, we want all the public to think that everything is being fair, because it is being fair. We're trying to be fair. So this law 87104 was enacted actually in the 1990s. There was a loan default in a state loan program, cost the state millions of dollars, and it was based on a contract that an advisory committee member influenced. So at that point, back 30 years ago, the legislature said, well, this is a gap, we have to fix this, and they adopted this 87104. It then was basically adopted by the legislature, and we have to make sure that CARB complies with this law. So going forward, we're not going to execute contracts, grants that actually have a prohibited communication by an advisory committee member. And so we're trying to be really clear about this. There's, been some, it wasn't, we weren't thinking about this very actively a year ago. We're trying to do this. We're changing all of our staff. There's been miscommunications, admittedly, between some of our staff and some other people's externally. But going forward, we're going to try to get this right. So one of the ways of getting this right is we told all of the staff, all 1,800 of us at CARB, this is what the rules are. Ask if you have any questions. I'm personally going to each of the advisory committees and saying, this is really important. We're all in this together, and we're going to do it right. We're just going to make sure that everything is implemented correctly. There was a comment earlier today that the Energy Commission does it differently. Actually, we consulted with the Energy Commission, and I believe we're doing everything identically with the Energy Commission. So we'll look into any other, once again, this is always, we're trying to make it better. If there's something that we're doing differently than the CEC, which I don't think we are, we will make sure that we get that nailed down. So if we go to the next slide, I want to dig into this a little bit further, kind of what is a prohibited communication or appearance. So it could include many things. It could be actually literally or an appearance in front of the board. It could be that a advisory committee member is a principal investigator or a co-principal investigator. They could be on the grant application. It can be an informal communication like a text or a phone call. It could be formal ones. And it could be a letter of support for a grant application. It could be a verbal or written comment at a board meeting or submitted on a comment docket for like a rulemaking or something. And very specifically, an advisory committee member cannot sign an application to CARB for a grant. So that's really something that we're focusing on very clearly right now. Besides what's prohibited, the next question is who is prohibited from receiving these? Once again, the legislature made it very broad. This is not our decision. The legislature said it applies to everybody. So it's the chair, the board members, the executive officer, the deputy executive officers, in fact, anybody working for CARB. And so, the idea here is that, which goes back to the fairness concept, is each of the people on the advisory committees, you're very important to CARB, you're serving on this advisory committee. Some of the people like EJAC are very formally appointed by the board at an open board meeting. Other subcommittees, most of them are very formal. But what we're trying to do is we're recognizing the importance of these actual formal advisory committee members. And with that, you carry influence because of who you are. And so you're all very well regarded as members of different advisory committees. You have influence. And what the legislature says, it's not fair to have people who have influence have a leg up. And so that basically is the problem. And yes, we're still on 87104. There's a question in the chat. So this is all about 87104. And so, so it's broadly in terms of the types of communication, and it's broad in to whom these communications could be made. Okay, can we go to the next slide? Okay, so what does this mean? So what we can't do is be, as I had said before, signatory administrator, principal investigator on any contract. So they shouldn't be, an advisory committee member should not be listed on the grant application or bid unless there's just something that's attached to it that is like an org chart that says this is our NGO and this is who the groups are. That's okay, but it can't actually be somebody who's really actively involved. But this also applies to individuals, okay? So it applies to the actual advisory committee member. It doesn't apply to your colleagues in your NGO. And so one way that people have been handling this, trying to implement this law, is to put up firewalls within your organization. So you have 5 people, in your organization. The scope of work says that person A and B is going to do the work, and somebody else, member, somebody else in the organization is on the advisory committee. So it doesn't knock out the whole organization. It applies to the actual person who is the member of the advisory committee. So it's not, there's some limits on that. What I wanted to mention is that it can't just be a pretend firewall. You actually have to take this seriously. I'm sure everybody would take this seriously. And we just have to get this worked out going forward and going backwards. Okay, so, and the reason why it's really important, whoops, I just realized my video was off. I've been chatting away. If it's important, it's like, why is this important? And it's important because there's consequences to the advisory committee members. This is actually a criminal statute. So I'm telling everybody this and really highlighting the importance of it, because once again, other people can enforce it. And there are criminal prosecutions, a contract can be voided, which means wiped out, and there's other kinds of consequences. And once again, CARB is not enforcing this rule. Other people do that, like district attorneys, attorney general, FPPC. However, we also can't be neutral, we can't be passive, and we have an obligation to make sure all the agreements and grants comply with this law. So, so I saw a comment pop up in the chat. We are communicating very poorly about this, these rules, and I don't disagree with that, Dr. Jarrett. This was not, and that's why we're doing this very complex, or not complex, very far-reaching comment to both the advisory committee members and also to all of our staff. We're going to be doing some internal FAQs so people know how to handle this. We're going to be doing external FAQs where we gather questions from people like on this meeting or elsewhere to say, how does this work in real life? And we'll make them up into kind of hypothetical kind of situations. And in terms of how you can handle the situation with, if you find you are an advisory committee member, so kind of what can you do? All right, so you can still, the organization, as I said, can still apply for grants and contracts, but it can't have the influence by an advisory committee member. The organization can still conduct general advocacy for policies and funding. The prohibition is limited to very specific contracts, grants, loans, licenses, and there's kind of, there's certain things that you can do. So the question is, how do you handle it if you're in this position? And once again, you can do, you can have somebody else in your organization sign it. You can step down as an official member of the advisory committee. That does not mean you can't be, the public attends these. These are Bagley Keens. You can attend these things. You can still participate in the activities of the AB 617 Consultation Group. Or you could decide to stay on the committee and not apply for a particular CARB grant. So there's different options of compliance. So to be super specific, if your organization wants to apply for a CARB grant and you're on an advisory committee, as I said before, you can't sign it, you can't administer the grant, you can't be named in there, though you can show up as the org chart. And once again, this is fairness. You're influential people. Just having your name associated with a grant application, the legislature decided that is something that is really important from a conflict of interest point of view not to do. And once again, CARB implements the laws, including this one. And I admit that some of the outreach in the previous years wasn't great. We did do some presentations to EJAC last fall, apparently not to this group, but remedying it today. And also, as I said, we're going to move out to our other Bagley-Keene advisory groups. Okay, so I just have a couple more slides. The next ones are quicker. So if we could go to the next one, Bagley-Keene. Great. So this is the open meetings law. Next slide, please. This applies to all state bodies. An advisory committee by definition is a state body. And it applies if you created 3 or more people. Since you have 2 of the CARB board members on this advisory committee, you absolutely need to you're underneath these rules. And so you're part of the Bagley-Keene. You all know that. We send out agendas, we have public comment, and so forth. And as I said before, there's going to be later this year, there will be 6 total advisory committees that are underneath these requirements, including Bagley-Keene. And each advisory committee has to comply with Bagley-Keene. Go to the next one, please. So some of these you've already seen. We have 10-day notice of agendas for committee meetings. The public has access to all these meetings. The public has opportunity to comment. This is actually, we're still in a legislative rule that is going to change on June 30th. Right now, all of the members these state bodies, these advisory committees can meet entirely by teleconferences, which you're doing here today. That expires at the end of June. So the legislature has been amending this starting during the pandemic. There hopefully will be another change to the allowing this teleconference, but we'll have to stand by. That rule expires rather at the end of June, and then everybody has to meet in person. Okay, can we go to the next slide? Almost finished here. Public Records Act. Go to the next slide, please. So advisory committee members, just like state agencies, because you are basically state bodies, have to comply with Public Records Act requests. So the Public Records Act requests will come to CARB that we have, set aside. It's on our webpage how you turn in a Public Record Act request. And to date, we haven't had any requests for documents that came from the AB 617 Consultation Group, but I wanted you to know that that is out there. So if we get a Public Record Act request asking for information about the AB 617 Consultation Group, we will respond to it on behalf of the consultation group. But there's also been court decisions that say you can't just use your personal cell phone, for example, and avoid Public Records Act requests. So our board has a policy where if they get something, they just automatically send it to the board advisory committee. So we have a record of it, so we don't have to bother their cell phone. I'm telling you, this never happened before, but it could happen. Somebody could ask for something, and then we would have to ask you folks individually, do you have anything that's responsive to this Public Records Act request on your personal email or your phone or whatever? So we generally tell all of our folks on advisory committee members and our board members is, don't generate documents that you don't want to have released. There's lots of exemptions. We would absolutely go through and fight for all this. We would not give up anything without discussing it with you. I think it's a long shot that this would ever come up. But since we're going through transparency, I wanted to let you know that this rule, because you're a member of the advisory committee, the Public Records Act obligations apply to each member on the advisory committee. So that's kind of the transparency, the conflicts, the Bagley-Keene open meetings, and also the PRAs. So that's the end of the written presentation, and I'll try to answer questions.
Thank you, Ellen. And you probably haven't been able to monitor the chat while you were talking, but
no,
there's a firestorm there.
Yeah, I can imagine. And once I said, a lot of this stuff is we're going to come out with some external, FAQs. And so some of these, and I know you have other business. I don't want to, we can.
I do think I've counted at least 5 people that have to resign from the consultation group. So that's a big hit to us. But one specific person.
Wait,
Paula,
this is going forwards too. This is contracts going forwards, but we can talk about it. I don't want to talk about individual cases in front of everybody and the world necessarily, but.
Okay, but here's a clarification then.
Okay.
It's for individuals, right?
Correct.
So an organization could have somebody else who's not on a contract with CARB represent that organization, correct?
Correct. We have to do this firewall, and we can, in our FAQs, we can lay it out very clearly. We've talked to people already, specifically how to do it. You have to think of it as you're an important person, and you might win because who your important person is, and we just have to insulate that group from the application.
Okay, so, it is a big issue in terms of the number of people that have indicated that they would have to resign. I guess if there's a future conflict, past conflicts, wouldn't count.
Past conflicts, we'll have to talk to folks generally.
Okay.
I can do that. The people with past conflicts know who you are. So we'll reach out to you.
So there are a number of hands up. I think Luis's hand up was first, and then Kevin, and then Michael Kleinman. So Luis.
I have a couple questions. One is, I'm curious to know what date was the consultation group deputized to become an advisory under Bagley-Keene?
We might have to get back to you on that. I don't have that date on the top of my head.
Okay.
Chanel, do you know?
Sorry, and Dolly's chiming in. Jody might chime in, so Jody might know. I don't have the act date on my top of my head either.
It's okay. It's okay. So, so Alan, what you're letting us know is that in reality, we're not a consultation group. We are deputized, official, recognized advisory group appointed by who?
It triggers off because you have 2 board members on there. That's actually an interesting group question, Luis. I was thinking about how, what triggered that off. So I think we're going to have to get back to you on how that rolls out. I mean, some of them are very clear, like EJAC is being considered by the board at the March board meeting. They're going to name names. The same thing with the research screening committee.
Okay, so then as of this presentation, we should consider ourselves official advisory board members. So we shouldn't even call ourselves a consultation group, because originally the idea of avoiding becoming a advisory, the CARB opted to move us in the direction of becoming a consultation group, a non-official consultation. Now, I'm not arguing the fact of what it is or what it is not, but I just want to make sure that we're not talking about best practices, that we are talking about legally defensible characterization of this body.
Right.
If
So
we
you guys have been following the Bagley-Keene Acts for quite a while. So I think that was the point where we sought to do it. But I guess I don't know your structure, and that's why Luis and maybe some of the other people that have hands up, we have to take that back, because I don't know if you had, and this is my ignorance. I don't know if you have official members and non-official members. So
Ellen, I can jump in. Luis is correct about the history. There was a specific desire on the part of then Chair Nichols and the executive officer at the time to differentiate the consultation group from EJAC.
Right.
To be a different kind of body that would be advising rather than or consulting rather than sort of advising under the AB 32, which set up the EJAC. And so if there's a little bit of inconsistency, I can understand where Luis is coming from. It is that we were told we were just to give advice and we didn't have any sort of policy responsibility. So I'm not arguing the legality here, but I do think Luis and perhaps others might feel that there was some inconsistency there, that now we're elevated to the same kind of situation as EJAC when we were specifically not supposed to be.
That's correct, board member Balmes. Well, look, I know we went through the same exercise as the EJAC, and that's clear. That is an appointed advisory. This body was never intended to be an appointed advisory. So I think it will be important. I would have hoped that even before having to go through this exercise, that we would have known, is this body actually an appointed, commissioned, deputized advisory board under the Bagley-Keene or the Brown Act or any other legal umbrella that we need to operate under? Because even today, right now, there is no answers as to the characteristics as to whether it should be triggered or not. I just don't want to be putting, my fellow colleagues or this consultation group to meet certain standards that may or may not be necessary, because I would assume, and I kind of go back to what Ms. Margaret's comments are, and I'm not saying she said specifically this, but I just have to draw up some of her words. It feels like we're being put these restrictions and being put on notice, but yet there's no preparation to really tell us, are we Bagley-Keene? Are we not Bagley-Keene? We need some clarity on that, because it doesn't feel good when we're being told, hey, you can't do this, you can't do that, but then there's no legal, defensible, backing us to why we're being told, and being given guardrails. So look, this is not, again, I'm just trying to bring in my best possible tone, my best possible self here. But at the same time, I feel like if we're being told, here is a list of things that this is how, like they say, right? This is how the cookie crumbles. But then it's like, well, I'm not really sure. Yes, maybe it is, maybe not. I don't know.
Okay, so I actually, all right. So I don't try to say.
Hey, Ellen, before you chime in, I actually think that Deldy has her hand up, and I think that
I'm sorry.
you may have wanted to respond to some of these things.
Oh, I just wanted, thank you. I just wanted to reflect that there's a reality here from the historical perspective, just as Dr. Balmes outlined. I just also want to say that when I came on board, and we all were dealing with COVID, right? It was made very clear to me by our legal counsel that in fact, despite the name of the group, this particular group is subject to Bagley-Keene. And it came to a head, you all may remember, when the exemption for meetings, remote meetings ended, and we all needed to figure out how we were going to have an in-person quorum. And the requirement for that actually comes from the Bagley-Keene open meetings, right? And so this back then, it was made clear and to everyone that in fact this group is subject to Bagley-Keene.
And just to add that, thanks, Deldy, and to add that in the trigger of this is you, John, as the first board member, and then added by your co-chair, Ms. Hurt, to when you were on, by operation of law, by statute, once again, because one or more of the board members are involved, Bagley-Keene is triggered. And that's government code section 11121D, like in dog. And thanks, Abigail, for knowing all of this, the citation. So it's the one board member and the funding that makes you a state body. Once you're a state body, everything else follows from that, all these different statutes. And we become more focused on the conflict of interest because it was brought to our attention by our colleagues at the CEC because they were struggling with how to do it. And we said, we need to do, you know, what? Frankly, it was like, oh my gosh, this is from 1990. We didn't have Bagley King groups back then, and now we're doing it right. So apologies for not knowing this in 1990. It wasn't triggered up for us. It is now, and we're just gonna help everybody work through all of the different the pieces of this. So
thank you, Ellen. And so I want to apologize for not recognizing Michael Kleinman earlier, but he's an old friend. He'll give me some slack. So I think that, you know, in the interest of time, try to keep your comments, which are important to us, as focused as possible. So I have Michael Kleinman, then Kevin Hamilton, then Ms. Margaret. Though, you know, Paula has and Erica have contributed by chat. So if they want to speak orally, I'll give them a chance. And I know there's at least one public commenter who is Naimeen Martinez, who we'll definitely want to hear from. So Michael.
Okay, thank you. Couple of things. One is I'm glad to hear that it's not going to be applied retroactively, which would have been a mess. In a lot of the federal committees that I serve on, we're appointed as special government employees, and the proscription against violation deals with specific topics that you are dealing with, and not necessarily all things going on, for example, in the state. So going forward, it would be really good if policy could be designed to not exclude people who are on these committees from doing things that are not related to a committee's activity. So for example, if, you know, on the SRP, I deal with toxic substances. And so obviously I would not be allowed to provide contracts and grants to do research on something related to developing standards on that. But, you know, so I think this ruling is overly broad, and going forward, I think they really, the administrators need to tighten it up a little bit and make it more relevant to what each of these committees does, as opposed to a general banning of qualified people from participating.
thank you very much, Dr. Kleinman. Those are good suggestions. I think as we are pivoting also to the research screening committee and the scientific review panel, all of these nuances have to get worked out. On the other hand, we can't just ignore the law. So we will, good points, and we'll look and see how we can implement that. Thank you.
So Kevin, you're up next, and you just put something in the chat.
Right, I thought Michael's point was well taken, should be well taken, and it would actually just increase the resolution of the law, right? Which makes a lot more sense. Sort of a refinement, because in our, so full disclosure, again, yes, this came up with CEC. I sit on several committees over there. It was a blindside moment then. An actual commissioner called me and said, Kevin, really hate to tell you this, and don't want to really lose you from this committee, but so we made an internal decision and we actually created that firewall. I do not sign any of these contracts. I'm not funded by any of their contracts internally, but we are an organization that now has 36 people and 3 offices. So yeah, we couldn't have done that in 2013 when we had 4 and 1 office. So, it's what I'm thinking about is twofold. Number one, for those of us who work across different agencies, and one of my colleagues just spoke to me while this was going on about an hour ago, and he is, I'm going to call him a victim of this to a certain extent. And he was talking about over at just Cal EPA in general and grants there, kind of chewing on him about what he might be signing and what he might be doing. And so that kind of goes back to Michael's, but his organization is very small. They only have 4 people. So, yet we wouldn't want to lose his advice. He just passed the bar, by the way, just FYI. So I look forward to him, or no, he didn't pass. I'm sorry, took the bar. I don't want to say he passed it. He doesn't know till May. But at any rate, so we may find him taking a stronger role here at some point, I hope. But again, we wouldn't want to lose that voice from those many organizations across the state who were in 617, the voices that we want to hear, that we want at this table, that we want on these committees. It's absolutely mandatory, but they don't have the internal organizational structure or depth. More depth. It's more about capacity and depth to have somebody else authorize somebody else to be the signator on this contract, let alone not be on the budget. Now, that said, I will agree that you could say there's an appearance. Anybody could, because appearance is subjective. There's nothing objective about it. It's totally subjective. That because you're on this committee and you got a community air grant, must be because you're on this committee, or you're on EJAC, or you're on, I don't care what committee it is, committee on, how bright your shoes should be today when you walk in the door, because it's CARB and CARB gave you money. So, I mean, how far are we willing to take that? I don't think that was the intent of the legislature at all. I really don't. And I think that this is complicated. I agree. It's dangerous in that it's criminal law. Potentially violation could see me in jail for 6 months, $10,000, something nobody wants to see, including me. And it's being cut in across all the agencies in the states. You got 13 big agencies and their sub-agencies and groups. So how do we resolve that? Well, you actually have a resolution. You have a chief legal officer in this state. That chief legal officer even has now a division that looks at environmental justice issues, thanks to another great colleague of ours who came out of Grayson, California, of all places. So why aren't the legal teams in the agencies getting together and saying to the Attorney General's office, hey, we'd love to have your interpretation of this, that we can then at least have conformity. I'll accept that. I may not like it, but at least I don't have to bounce between agencies and say, okay, how are these guys interpreting it over here? How are these guys interpreting it over there? I don't think that's the intent from Ms. Peters or anybody else, believe me. And we're all busy, big agencies, lots of legal issues. But I think for these kinds of things that are cross agency, it just makes sense to step forward and go to the boss, so to speak, in all legal things in California, and let's get a decision there, and we'll have to live by it, or the orgs who choose can take other kinds of action, I suppose. But right now it's like whack-a-mole, so we don't want to play that game at all. So that's just my thoughts on that. But I want to thank you for that great presentation, by the way, Ms. Peter. That was very good and very informative. Thank you.
And I would, before I recognize Miss Margaret next, I just want to say several people in the chat, and Ellen, you don't want me to name names, have said they come from small organizations where they don't have that capacity that Kevin was referring to. And so we would lose them.
We talked
Okay.
about that. We talked about that at the EJAC as well. So I know that's an issue. And also, I don't have any, we can definitely ask the Attorney General. But as I said, we're trying to be consistent, but that is, I have absolutely no, issue with that. I worked there for over 20 years, happy to pull them into this. So.
Okay, so Miss Margaret's next, and Luis has his hand up again, but I'd like to hear from Paula before Luis, just because we haven't heard from her on this topic yet. So Miss Margaret.
Thank you, Dr. Baum. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
And we can see you now too. That's good.
All right. To the attorney, since the beginning of the consultation group, how many orientations have you given to us about transparency? To the attorney.
I'm sorry, this is the first one I personally did. If the question was directed to me,
So
Miss Margaret.
This is the first one you ever done.
The first one I ever did. I know we've done Bagley, Keene, and other topics.
Okay, let me finish. And also, how many orientations under your direction have your staff done to the consultation group?
I'll have to check on that, Miss Margaret, and get back to you. I don't know off the top of my head.
None. I've been here since the beginning. None.
I'm sorry.
None. Nothing. None.
I'm pretty sure we did.
If we go back and look at all the schedules of the consultation group, we can count on one hand of how many times you or your staff have presented transparency to us.
I know.
My issue is this here. Now I'll go back to the same thing. You're a day late and $1 short on trying to remedy something that you should have been part of a process prior to coming today. And you need to own that. You and your staff need to own that. And also, we're not, some of us don't get compensated for being at this table. There is nothing in the statute to say that we will receive X amount of dollars for being here. So how is that a conflict of interest when there is no X amount of dollars being stipend to the consultation members for being here? And that so how are we out of compliance by signing on to other CARB grants when there is no dollar amount for us to be sitting at this table called consultation? And I think there's a very poor excuse for you not to be fighting or taking up this advocacy for us to come here after 3 or 4 years to be more supportive, being more supportive of all the hard work many of us have done for 3 or 4 years. And then nothing that was presented by you supported environmental justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Margaret. And just to be clear, Ellen, I think that while we've, as Deldy has already said, we were told that we had to follow Bagley Keene, and that was really for mostly the meetings in person and a quorum and all that. I really don't think there's been any real discussion about conflict of interest until today.
No, I totally did that. That's why I came myself today.
And we appreciate that.
And the memo went out to EJAC in October. For some reasons, it was supposed to go to all the groups. It did not go to this group until October 31st. I apologize for that. I came today to do it myself. It's trying to be informational. We're going to try to keep doing more information. And I totally own it, Ms. Margaret, and that this is the first complete transparency, and we tried to hit the 3 different rules. So I acknowledge your comment, Ms. Margaret.
And Ellen, I would also underscore what Kevin said. We appreciate you did a very thorough, comprehensive presentation. So there's nothing towards you from me at any rate, but it surprised all of us, this policy.
It surprised me, frankly, that this has been around for since 1990s, and nobody knew it until the CEC called up and said, "What are you guys doing about it?" And we said, "Oh dear." So of course now I'm saying this in public, and as I say, I own it, and but we're trying to now do the best we can. So and work through solutions for people and looking at it forward looking. So
okay, so I want to recognize Paula next, unless Deldy has no, okay.
I'll go in order.
Yeah, thank you. There's a lot in here, and I went back to the 617 language, the actual legislation, like just to get like really clarity on the language. The program is focused to reduce exposure in communities most impacted by air pollution. And I wonder what this process around the bag leaking and the advisory committee will result in detrimental to that statement of the mission or the goal of 617. If we're thinking about the most impacted communities that perhaps even don't even have a community-based organization that represents them, then what does that look like to get their voices influence the 617 consultation group? Does that mean that we have to look at criteria for membership and I don't know if I missed this, but I don't know if we're saying like, this is how we're going to do it from the future and this is it, or if we're talking about it now to figure it out a better structure so that the membership is more inclusive. Because I wasn't sure if we're saying like, this is it, like this is what we're gonna do. And so because you have grants, you can't be here. Or if we're saying we're gonna figure out a better process to make sure that this space is inclusive, because I think this 617 space is very different than the scoping plan and the EJAC. As again, I'm referring back to the language, focusing most impacted communities. And I just wonder what's in the law that would facilitate such a process that is more inclusive. And then on the other hand, the other thing is, I think we all like there's a lot of members here that come with a lot of environmental justice history, environmental justice advocacy that is really important for this space. But the truth, and like that's something that needs to be acknowledged, is the dynamics around resources. And that's something that AB 617 also allowed. Like we wouldn't be here if the grants hadn't allowed communities to build capacity, to reach out to the community, to get people to learn about all of these things. So I guess I'm posing a question to one, like I don't understand whether we're following like this is it, like we can be here, or we're creating a better scenario that will include and be inclusive of the goal of AB 617 and what we've been doing with the AB 617 consultation group.
Thank you, Paula. And I don't know if Ellen or Chanel.
So I just want to be clear,
No,
this does
yeah.
not apply to the other AB 617 groups that are run by the Air District, the ones.
CSCs.
Thank you. So that's not applied to that. This is this group, and the trigger is by having Dr. Balmes and Vice Chair Hurt on this committee. So that is what the trigger was, to why it kicked in all these other requirements. So I think that's just something for point of information, we can think about that.
And maybe we should, I mean, I personally would consider stepping off the committee in order to.
It's not quite that simple, John. There's some more stuff.
Not that simple? Okay. Yeah,
I was just say the same thing. I can step away.
I just, sorry, Davina, just because I really value the voices of people like Paula, and to lose that is just, it's really hard. And she just was very eloquent. So sorry, Davina.
No, it's okay. I thought I did also hear that prior to me joining this group, that Back Keene was instituted and was being followed. So it's not just that I was added to the group that we're having this conversation. So I do want to underline that. And I wasn't going to actually speak up about this topic, but it does remind me of a conversation I had when we were talking about the research folks. And I was basically suggesting that we needed to increase pathways for diverse voices to sit at the table. And so we need to be more tailored or better tailored on ensuring that these rules don't chill or narrow the scope unwittingly of people that have all the background that's needed to really help us push AB 617 forward. So I feel like there may be more work to do so that we don't push away those seasoned and diverse voices, because it seems to me that many of them will be those trying to protect the most impacted communities, which will be out there trying to get those grants to protect them. So I'll stop there. I didn't want to say too much in that space, but I am concerned about diverse voices and equity.
So thank you.
Chime in really quick. I feel like I jumped the queue a bit, but I did want to support, I think, so Dr. Balmes, I think Davina, John Davina, sorry, I'm not sure if I'm using titles or not, but I just wanted to say a couple of things really quickly. So one, I think, I'm not saying that the process has necessarily been smooth on this, and but I think what we are trying to do at least is be as transparent as possible. So I'm not trying to say like, this is a great process, we did this wonderfully, but I do think that one of the things that when we knew about it, when we heard about it, when we had the information, we knew that we had to bring it to this group and we had to have that conversation. So I think, to me at least, I'm glad that we're having this conversation. I'm glad that we're talking about it. I'm glad that we're hearing the concerns, right? Because I think, in my opinion, that's just going to make it better in terms of like what we share out and how we move forward with it. I think I know that Luis brought it up, others have brought it up. We have had this conversation with the EJAC. We had it in October of last year with them, and then we had it again in February with them as well. And part of the point was, I think we were concerned, right? We were concerned about, I think, the impacts. Again, we're having it with the consultation group because we're concerned about the potential impacts. I do want to be clear, I think Ellen has been clear on this too. We cannot change the law, right? So we can't change the law, we can't do much on that front because it is what it is, right? So Government Code 87104, we can drop the language in the chat. People have that memo. It's government code, so we can't change that. But I do think that at least on our end and how we're thinking about this is that what we want to do is make sure that everybody is aware and understands potential impacts that it's going to have. And that I think as we're thinking about what we do and how we move forward, how can we do that together, I think, as a consultation group? I understand that people have concerns, people may need to step off. I think, again, we hear all of that, right? We understand that. And I think as LD pointed out, it's not necessarily as simple as just having, I think, the board members step off, for example, because I do see a lot of value in having board members being a part of these processes. For example, we have Gideon or board member Krakow, depending on if I'm using titles or not, as a part of our EJAC ad hoc subquorum, and we pulled that actually from the 617 process. And I think it's been really helpful to have him be a part of that process and have him work directly with the EJAC. And there's just a way that there's an access and communication with board members that is helpful. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that I know that this is a really live conversation right now. Again, I'm glad we're having it. I don't necessarily want to think that we should make any necessarily rash decisions right now at this point. I think at this point, I just think it's helpful to have the conversation and then give some time and some space in terms of like what we want to do. And I think, Luis, to your point on the law can be changed, I think that's true. And when I said that, just for clarification, I meant that we at CARB, so we as CARB individuals cannot do that. But I do think there's other options, there's other opportunities, right? And so I just want to be clear on that front. And sorry for jumping the queue on that.
Thank you, Chanel. So Deldy, you want to jump the queue?
I just want to appreciate the hard work that Ms. Margaret alluded to, that each member of the consultation group, including Ms. Margaret and everyone else, has done in support of this program. We really rely on this group. This law tells CARB consult with stakeholders. That's why CARB back then created this group. Would there have been other ways, and could there still be other ways to achieve that consultation requirement? Absolutely. But I also just want to point out that one of the other triggers for bag leaking is the expenditure of funds. And CARB has invested in this group. We have had a third-party facilitator at one point for quite a while. Back when we would travel, consultation members were reimbursed for their travel. And I'll just flag again that when that exemption expires again for remote meetings, because we are badly keen, we will be required to have a quorum, an in-person quorum of members. That means travel, that means expenses. We also would like to be able to compensate consultation group members through meaningful stipends. Right now, we don't have the authority to do that beyond a pretty modest amount. But so that's definitely something that we want to reserve for future conversations with this group. Again, so that we avoid people getting surprised and that we actually have these discussions together. So just want to appreciate the hard work that everyone has done on this consultation group. And if you have thought that, oh, maybe I should resign, I just, like Chanel said, let's just take a pause and talk together some more about that for each of you.
Yeah, thank you, Dildy. I also appreciate everybody's hard work on this group. And yeah, before you resign, please talk to Dildy or others at OCAP before making a rash decision, because we really don't want to lose you. So I'm going to take the co-chair's prerogative and ask Erica to speak next, because I don't think she's spoken yet today, except in the chat. So go ahead, Erica.
No, I appreciate that. And I'll be brief because I think I'm echoing what some others have said. And you might have answered the question that I had. I will reiterate, though, just gratitude for elevating the conversation, because this is something that I think those of us that are representing their stakeholders in a couple of other state spaces are going to have to deal with. And certainly the question for us now is, how do you maintain that equity for those smaller organizations like ours? How do you maintain the representation you want with subject matter expertise that really matters for some of those advisory groups? But the other thing that I think is important to ask is about enforcement, because for this particular committee, you're saying, okay, let's just pause and think about it. But I know that there are things in the works and certainly contracts being signed and work being approved or not. And so it'd be helpful for us to understand how best not to position CARB or our organizations in a negative way as we figure all of this out. And so I'd like some guidance around timelines or dates or exactly how we should be proceeding, given that there is, I know, a lot of activity that's going to continue. Certainly from a funding environment perspective, there are lots of RFPs and those kinds of things taking place, even at CARB and other places. So would love to understand what enforcement looks like and what grace periods look like and how criteria can be expressed a little bit more clearly.
So I think Ellen,
let me jump in.
Go ahead.
I want to be really clear. The law applies now. Everybody has to comply. Please don't sign a contract and turn it into CARB, period, the end. Okay. We tried to give some ways of firewalls and so forth around that. There's no grace period on the statute. It's in effect now. We're looking at, possibilities. I don't know of any right off the top. Looking backwards, there are some possibilities. Looking forward, there's no. Just don't submit a application. In terms of how you implement a firewall and what does that mean, we'll try to put out some external FAQs to give more detail. And if you have a question, you can flag it with probably Dildy, and we'll try to assist. But there's no grace period on the statute. So if I led anybody in that direction, I apologize. That's not what I meant. So thanks, John, for letting me jump in.
Thanks again for being clear, Ellen. So I think both Luis and Miss Margaret have their hands up. I can't remember who was first, but
I can wait.
Pardon?
I can wait for Miss Margaret.
I think that's wise, Luis. So Miss Margaret.
Outside of Dildy, so far has expressed some type of supportive leaning to make sure the EJ people can stay at this consultation room, be part of the consultation. I would like to hear from Ellen, the legal piece. What is the strategy? What is the plan for her to be a part of the champion for many of us who put in all this hard work for the last 3 or 4 years? What is her strategy? Where is her flexibility? Where's her plan? How she's gonna become our champion here? I haven't heard any of that so far. And it's very disappointing. It's very disappointing that you come and be a messenger, but you don't see the value coming back as how you could be our champion. That's very disappointing.
May I respond?
Yeah, Ellen, please.
Miss Margaret, I have been involved in environmental justice issues back when I was a legal aid lawyer with California Rural Legal Assistance in the 1970s.
Now, let's talk about now.
All right. And
I'm 76 years old. I can talk about my past. I want to talk about now. Now.
And because of that background, I am supportive of the issue. I did not express that here today. I'm expressing that now. With respect to grants, any group that has 2 members can do a firewall, and they can submit a grant application with 1 person signing it, not the member of this advisory committee. And then it's, as I said earlier, it goes with the person on the advisory committee. So Paula, if you have 2 people in your group, the grant can be signed and the work, the scope of the work mentions that person. We talked about this in the EJAC. There was a question with respect to alternates on EJAC, and we were cognizant of the fact that the alternate, if you had small groups, the alternate in EJAC coming from that group would limit people being on EJAC. So I understand that Chanel's group is thinking about that and has told people about how that alternate can work, which allows small organizations to be on the EJAC. Same thing here. Paul, if you have 1 other person on your group, that person can submit the grant application. If you're a single operator, then maybe you need to think about working with another group and coordinating the work. You just have to be really clear on the application not to sign it. So so that's what I would like to say. I tried to cover that earlier, but it's maybe not specific enough. So thank you.
Okay, based on what you just said, put it in a document. Break that down into a document as a memo so we can have that as a baseline that you are being transparent and that champion have a strategy and a plan to this group.
So
that's what, that would make me feel that I could trust what you're saying. Until I have that, have a memo or something clarifying what you just said, I can't trust you.
I think it was in the slides. I think it was a transparency memo. It definitely would be in the FAQs. And
yeah, I think if you put it in the FAQs with that kind of a firewall, that it goes with the person, not the organization, so long as the contract is clear.
Okay,
that's
can
very
do that.
helpful.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Margaret. And I have Luis next and then Jesse.
Thank you, Dr. Balmes. I have a recommendation. My recommendation is that CARB transmit an official document deputizing this advisory as the Bagley-Keene advisory, and that document be transmitted as early as today. I am not aware that any document has been transmitted that recognizes this body, this consultation group, as a formal Bagley-Keene advisory. But I may be wrong. So that's one. The other is, because I am a visual learner and I'm not intending to ask others to do the work for me, but I certainly would like to understand how CARB legal has interpreted that 2 Brown Act board members trigger by default a Bagley-Keene advisory. So then now are we governed by Bagley-Keene or Brown Act or both? So those are 2 questions that I would like to hopefully find an answer here, especially because members of this advisory may have already submitted applications, not knowing that they would be subjected to these conditions, and that deadline being as early as last week. I'm not speaking for myself. I'm speaking that the potential there may be others who are in that predicament. So for that reason, I feel like we really need to do our due diligence and making sure that there is legal defensible documentation and that there is agreement that this formerly known as a consultation non-Bagley-Keene, that every one of these members have agreed to become to be a part of a Bagley-Keene governed or Brown Act governed, because it's unclear to me, because I don't know how you go from having 2 Brown Act board members become Bagley-Keene covered or vice versa. That's not very clear to me. I'm not saying I'm not challenging that law necessarily. I just want to understand it. But certainly I'd like to see where the official transmittal was done and who and how we become deputized. What is the legal procedures, steps that CARB made to make that official, agreed upon by consensus, or not by consensus, but by consent of each and every one of these members that are part of my colleagues in this advisory. If that hasn't been done, then I would urge the legal to do that and make that an official transmittal, official documentation, and certainly allow the members of this advisory who are concerned to make those informed decisions. So Ellen, I know that you've been responding to all of this. I hope that you might have some answers that my colleagues can take back and hopefully be given the proper notification to be able to make those adjustments or the decisions that they need to make.
Okay, should I answer that, John? I mean, I
Ellen,
don't want to.
we're glad that you're here to answer
Okay,
questions.
that's fine.
Go
I
ahead.
don't want to, I realize that on my 15 minutes has gone on longer, and I apologize for taking other people's time, everybody's
No
time up.
apologies necessary. We
Okay,
appreciate
all
it.
right. So first of all, on Bagley-Keene versus Brown Act, it is a Bagley-Keene. Bagley-Keene applies to state agencies, period, the end. Brown Act does not apply to the state. That would apply to your air districts, groups. So Bagley-Keene only for state. In terms of a official designation of who's a member, who's not, I can just tell from being on this. There's certain people that have their hands up that are attendees, and there's certain ones that are panelists. I think I get the impression the panelists are members, but once again, I defer to your 2 co-chairs and to Deldy. I'm not sure how you go about becoming an official member or not. And in terms of the grants, the memo went out to this group on January 31st, I believe. And then in the solicitations for the grants that have gone out since then, including the ones that for last week, there was a provision about 87104 in that. And so hopefully it was clear enough. Hopefully today made it more clear. It is applied, and we've been trying to tell folks about it. So that maybe answers your questions, Luis. But I'll defer actually question 2 back to Dr. Balmes and Ms. Hurt.
May I just for clarification? Okay, so this advisory came together as a consultation at the time that all members were brought in. I was assuming the majority were brought in. It was characterized as non-Bagley-Keene, but then at some point, that notification per CARB's legal would have been made clear to all the members at some point in time, and I don't know what that point in time was, that this body was no longer a sort of a loosely formed consultation group. By default, and excuse my ignorance, but you're telling me that the CARB board is Bagley-Keene, not Brown Act?
Yes. All the state agencies are Bagley-Keene.
Oh, okay, understand.
And then I'm told by
my
somebody
ignorance.
that the public agenda notices, which would appear to be only triggered by Bagley-Keene, go back at least to January 2018. So it's been a Bagley-Keene group for a long time, and that timing actually lines up with what Dr. Balmes, you were saying, that that there was a desire to involve you and make it more officially recognized.
Oh, okay. So you've been here, Ellen, long enough as I have in this advisory, and we know I recollect very clearly that the fact that we opted as a body to follow best practices does not necessarily translate into the fact that we were acknowledged or recognized as Bagley-Keene. That was just the fact that we were following best practices, right? So that point in time of 2018 and the fact that we were noticing does not necessarily equate to the fact that at that point in time, we as a body were noticed, asked, and consulted as to whether we accepted the role of an advisory to the state agency under Bagley-Keene.
Can I jump in here? Because I want to address your question, Louise. Is that okay?
Go ahead, Deldy.
All right.
Deldy, and look, I appreciate, and I mean, no disrespect, but it sounds like we're having a legal conversation here, and I'm not an attorney, I should disclose that, but it sounds to me that it's most appropriate to hear it, really, because I think right here is the mechanics of the legal, right? I'm not challenging it, I just want to understand it. And Deldy, look, if you're part of the legal team,
no,
I completely honor and respect that.
I'm not an attorney, Louise, I promise.
It's just, I think these are very, very specific legal questions that we're asking, right?
Well, they are, but I also do have something to contribute that for the benefit of the group.
Go ahead, Deldy. I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you. So today, Ellen's presentation wrapped in 3 really important legal requirements, right? I want to zero in on Bagley-Keene because that's what you're asking about. I want to remind the group again that when the exemption expired for remote meetings, we CARB, OCAP, Liliana, me, we communicated to this group via email several times that we were a body that was subject to Bagley-Keene, and that as a result, we needed to ensure we would have an in-person quorum. Those we can find those emails and resend them to everybody, but there was no like deputization. There was the advice, right, that was really triggered by the expiration of this important exemption that made all of us need to communicate very directly to everyone. We need to go back to in-person meetings. This thing is expiring because we're subject to Bagley-Keene. Here's why we're subject to Bagley-Keene. So we have communicated that.
Right. Okay. So again, I'm not trying to be difficult here. We're dealing with the law, and I want to make sure CARB is, I support CARB doing all it needs to do, but also as an advisory member, I just want to make sure that we as member also have been properly notified, and that memos were transmitted, and that we were given that option, that notification that if we should accept a Bagley-Keene appointment. And I don't recall that happened. Because I can say anything right now. I don't have the power to deputize anybody to become the sheriff of Sacramento. We all can say a lot of things. And so I understand. I'm not trying to, mischaracterize facts, but CARB is bringing its facts. I thank you for the opportunity to be able to then articulate the interpretation and the sequence of events that happen, and then translate those into which ones are official and which ones are open to interpretation to such a degree that may not be the best practice, may not be the the best path to properly notify, is particular in this perhaps very unique situation where you have a body that was brought in as a non-Bagley Keene, and somewhere along the way, you just by default, without notification, is what it seems to me, without proper notification. Because if there was proper notification, we wouldn't be having this circle of many questions and confusions. So again, my recommendation is, if CARB would be willing, and I'm assuming to the extent that, because we know that this is a legal matter, that's clear to me, that if CARB legal would then afford us the opportunity to go through that exercise,
right, to
assure that we are formally consulted and given the opportunity to determine whether the most suitable role for us is to become part of a body that is now governed and triggered into a Bagley Keene, that we be afforded that notification and be properly notified, and then that this be transmitted in a memo or any other means of defensible. I would say, excuse my language, I don't mean to make this into a negative at all, but that we be afforded that as of this point.
Wait,
moving forward.
Sorry, Luis, before you, Ms. Margaret, I just wanted to chime in because I think this is, and I hear you saying it's a legal issue. It's actually legal and programmatic, just to be clear, right? So as the deputy, I'll chime in because I think some of this is legal, right? But some of this is programmatic in terms of how we're running 617. And so I think I hear a couple of issues. I hear you, one, saying that it was not clear in January of 2018 that this became a Bagley Keene entity when I think Dr. Balmes joined it. So I think that's one thing, right? That's very clear. Obviously, I was not here in 2018. Deldy was not here. We were not running the consultation group. And so I think right, so I'm not gonna be able to go back in time, right, to be able to kind of like course correct on what should have happened in 2018, right, when I wasn't here and Deldy wasn't here and we weren't kind of facilitating or running the consultation group. What I do hear you asking, right, is this like wanting to have that formal communication and that decision making, right, of like, what are we going to do going forward and whether or not we want to be a Bagley Keene. What I would ask, I think, from you is that you give me the time to work with Ellen and my colleague, right? She's the chief counsel, I'm the deputy, we're both at the same level, because again, it's programmatic and it's legal, so that we can respond to this request appropriately, because we're not going to figure it out right now. And what I hate to do is to overcommit or overpromise in the moment, but I would like to have the opportunity to talk with Ellen and think through what that means. The one thing I would say that is probably very clear, and Ellen, I think this is where I would want your advice to make sure that I'm getting this correct. Whether or not, right, going forward, we come back to the group and say, hey, you have the option, this is a memo, whatever that looks like. It doesn't, the government code with the current language, right, and the current interpretation stands as it is. So that won't change. What we can do, like I said, after Ellen and I have that conversation, is think through how do we honor that request? Like how do we, or I guess not even honor, but how do we take that request that you're giving us and think through the best approach? And obviously, Deldy, as the chief of this program, you be part of those conversations as well.
Because let me say this real quick. Y'all have not done your due diligence before or after you came. Because if you had done your due diligence, we would have more awareness through workshops, as orientation and education has been part of a thread through the consultation process. It's not there. It's no such thing.
And I just want to be clear that my questions were strictly legal because that's what's being presented to us. The programmatic is of no consequence as far as I interpret it. It is the legal mechanics that are being presented to us and the definitions and interpretations that are being presented to us. And so So again, Chanel, maybe we need to talk and understand better where, how you're tying the programmatic and the legal, but I think the conversation right now was strictly on the legal and the mechanics, and by virtue of these triggers, and as well as those expectations that we would have had as especially at a time where we expect, greater transparency, more equity, so I think CARB, I think it would be in the best interest of all of us to begin that process of making that formal transitions, particularly, because so much gets lost, especially during COVID and during these exemptions that occurred. I don't believe that the proper steps were taken to bring us back into this new governance. So I'll leave it at that. Yeah, thank you,
Luis,
Dr.
yeah,
Balmes.
thank you. I want to thank you and Miss Margaret for your, comments, and for Chanel, Dildy, and Ellen for, trying to respond. And I agree with Chanel, we shouldn't do this on the fly. So she's committed to talk to Ellen and then and Dildy and come up with some communications that will clarify some of the issues at hand. We only have 9 minutes left. Jesse's had his hand up, and we haven't heard from any public members or public attendees that may wish to comment. I just really want to echo something that's in the chat. I think we really need to look at this chat as CARB. The loss of voices on the consultation group is an issue that I'm concerned with. I don't want to break laws, but I also want to keep as many of the current members that have worked hard for many years or are coming in and working hard in the shorter term. I don't want to lose those voices. So, Luis, I think you should put your hand down because I don't think we're going to call on you again. Sorry, my friend. But Jesse.
Okay, sorry, but I have to throw in another monkey wrench into the picture.
Oh no.
Our EJ organization is fairly small, but we have a fiscal sponsor. Our fiscal sponsor is the signatory on the contract. Although I wrote the proposal, I will administer the proposal and exercise authority for all expenditures on the proposal. Is that enough of a firewall for me or not? Or is that something that needs now to also be explored?
I don't want to answer for Ellen, but I think she said that a fiscal sponsor, if they're signing the contract, it depends what role you have on the contract. If you're going to be funded on the contract, even if there's a fiscal sponsor, my understanding for what Ellen said is that, that would be a problem. But anyway, I don't know if Ellen's still on. I don't want to try to be a lawyer.
We can talk off the side too to go over into more detail.
Yeah, why don't you? That's a good point.
Okay.
Yeah, I see my co-chair shaking her head vigorously. Yeah, that's something you should explore with staff, CARB staff. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Balmes, I think we should do public comments on this item.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
So Adriana or whoever is monitoring, Melinda, who's
Yes, Naiming, I believe his hand is raised. He's been waiting patiently for a very long time. Naiming Martinez.
Oh, Naiming, yes, who just stepped off this committee. because of
Naomi, you're,
conflict.
okay, there it is.
I hope you can hear me, guys. You can hear my voice is very scratchy, but well, I'm very blunt, and this is what I'm gonna say. I decided to step down because even with those firewalls that were described today, I couldn't make it happen because I just signed a grant last Friday. And by the way, when this was informed to me by some of the CARB staff, signing a grant application was not included as a conflict. They mentioned to me that it was a conflict if I have signed already a contract. And because we have a fiscal agency, I thought that didn't apply to me now. I even asked in our planning meeting if I should step down, and that was not the case. So just find out today that I had to step down. So that was very disappointing. I also agree that the communication about all these issues has been very messy and broken. And frankly, I think it is really hurting the participation of EJ voices, especially organizations small, because think about it. Even if I cannot participate, the other person or persons that I could be able to say represent us are persons that are working on our air quality, are persons that are working on these issues that certainly are going to be in the grant. So by this, it's like you are pushing us to the side. Either we give our advice or we participate in receiving any funding from CARB. And I'm sad to hear that we hear that, oh, the rule cannot be changed. Well, I'm sorry, but I agree with the testament in the comment, someone saying, when the law makes unintended results, we need to fight it. I don't know if you can do it, but I think I will, because I'm feeling very discriminated at this point. And I think that it's not me, it's many environmental justice groups like ours that are small, and despite our size, we're doing a lot of work. I feel abused, even if that was not the intention. Even when I was not a formal member of this group, I spent hours and hours on my personal time writing the different chapters of that people's blueprint. So my brain and my intel is welcome. And now you're just telling me that this was in 20 years ago, this was already valid. Why you didn't care to tell us that then and just now? I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm feeling very frustrated. And as I said, I feel very, like really once again, on paper and on the discourse, yes, you're doing something to work on EJ, but in the practice it's the opposite. By the actions that implement right now that being decided, I think you are saying one thing and doing another. So I'm sorry, I hope you guys have a successful continuing meetings. And I'm sorry I have not been able to stay in the committee.
Well, I'll just say, Naimeen, that I'm sorry that you are not staying on the committee, because your voice has always been very valuable to me. I've known you for a long time now. I'm choking up, actually. I just really think that this conversation has been very important. We've all learned a lot, not necessarily what we wanted to learn. And I do think that it sends out an unintended message that CARB doesn't care about EJ, even though we're just trying to, follow the law. I think that we've got to figure out a better way to move forward to not exclude people who have to, from small organizations who were handing out community air grants to help them build capacity, and then we say they can't participate in this process. And I realize that nobody on this call is trying to have that consequence to see it happen, but I think we need to figure out a way to communicate to the legislature how this is not, these are unintended consequences from the law that I think are problematic. In my 2 cents, I'm speaking as a person here, not as an official, state employee. So I don't think we have time for anything else on the agenda, but I think this was a really important conversation. I don't know if there are any other public participants that want to speak.
I don't see any hands raised, and I kind of turn to staff right now to see if there's anything else in this agenda that we definitely absolutely need to discuss last few minutes.
There's one thing I do remember, and I want people to, I feel bad talking about this right now because, a good chunk of the group may have to leave, but the next meeting is going to be focused on the draft blueprint 2.0 the entire meeting. Because we really need the input from the consultation group on what staff is coming up with. And the draft blueprint 2.0 from staff will be out in I think earlier April before the meeting, so that people should be able to read it and come prepared to give us input. So I hope we don't lose a lot of voices here.
I see Deldy's hands raised. Deldy?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, everyone. I know it's now 4 o'clock. I understand if some of you have to drop off. We did not have a chance to dive into CARB's update. One really important element that we wanted to share and lift up for you is actually the governor's proposed budget for the AB 617 program. If folks could just share the slide with the table, that would be helpful. We will follow up this meeting with an email that will include a written version of the update that we would have shared with you verbally. So please stay tuned for that. But I do just want to flag this. This is the proposed budget. You will see that there is a cut to the overall funding for the AB 617 program. It's reflected right here in part by showing 0 for the technical assistance community air grant program. However, it's a $50 million cut, so even that alone will not make up for the $50 million. So clearly this is a very important issue to all of us, and I just want to make sure everybody has this information.
Thank you, Deldy. I also see Christine's hand raised. Did you have a comment on this topic?
I just wanted to make a really brief comment that the items we didn't get to today have a lot of really important consequences on the program and are the result that I think we've all been trying to work towards. And if we can't figure out the procedural issues that we spend a lot of time talking about in these meetings and that we talked about today, we're never going to be able to get to talking about the substance of the program. And, you know, as we all should all together, which is, you know, in my view, the point of the consultation group is that everybody who's on this call today and has spoken on the call today gets together to talk about the actual substance and the work that's been done, which staff did a really fantastic job of summarizing in their annual implementation update. But there's so much information there that we could spend, frankly, the rest of the year or the next couple of years talking about. And so I hope that we can resolve some of these issues so that we can all, you know, the community members who need to participate, the air districts, OEHA, the academic members, and the business representatives and everybody else who's on the consultation group can actually talk about those issues. So I appreciate everybody. I just wanted to say, I appreciate that we had to have the conversation we had to have today. It was super important. I hope we can get it resolved so we can actually all start talking about what we all care the most about, which is the program's success.
Thank you for your comments. I just want to be clear. The things that we did not get to was an update with AB 617 milestones that Melinda was going to give, because there has been progress and great milestones that all of you have contributed to. And just a little bit on the timeline. So we did pretty much attack the big discussion items. It was just more of an update. And as Dr. Balmes said, we are going to be zeroing in the next meeting purely on the 2.0 timeline as far as the blueprint. And it's going to be the entire meeting. So I think there are slides regarding the update that have been shared with you. So you do have that information. But we do have our upcoming meeting. That's going to be all about the blueprint. Dr. Balmes, did you want to add anything or any staff members before we let folks go?
No, I mean, I'm sorry we didn't get to the program update because Melinda would have given a nice presentation. But thank you, Deldy, for putting up the slide about the budget. I want everybody to pay attention to that budget And just want to thank everybody for their participation today. You know, process, Christine, is frustrating, but it's necessary, especially in the context of trying to uplift the community voices that we value so much. So.
Okay, well, I thank you all for the discussion, and we will see you back April 19th, 1 to 4 p.m.
And I just would hope everybody would, with individual concerns about the transparency, Begley-Keene conflict of interest issue, reach out to staff with questions.
Yes, there's more conversations to be had. This is just the start. So thank you all for the work that you're doing. And if I could say, meeting adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Bye. I'm gonna end the meeting for all.
Oh, okay.
Great.
Thanks.
Bye. Thanks.